This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of it. It's been 6 months, and I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but what happened in my house last October completely changed my perspective. For context, I'm 30 years old, work in IT, and have always considered myself pretty level-headed. My girlfriend Megan and I had been living in our rented 2-bedroom house for about 8 months. It's nothing special, just a small place built in the 90s in a quiet neighborhood. The second bedroom serves as my PC room where I work and game. That night started like any other. Megan had gone to visit her sister, who lives about an hour away, and was staying overnight. I remember being slightly relieved to have the place to myself. I could stay up late gaming without feeling guilty. I ordered pizza, played some Call of Duty until around 9:30, then decided to call it a night. I shut down my PC, cleaned up the pizza box, and headed to the bathroom to brush my teeth. It was around 10 p.m. I remember checking my phone one last time before setting it down on the bathroom counter. The battery was at like 12%, but I figured I'd just charge it overnight. The bathroom door was cracked open about 4 inches. I never fully close it when I'm alone in the house. I was standing there just mindlessly brushing my teeth when I noticed something in the hallway through the crack in the door. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was this blue light, hovering about 5 feet off the ground. It wasn't like a regular flashlight beam, it was more like an orb, maybe the size of a softball with this weird bluish glow. My first rational thought was that maybe Megan had come home early and was using her phone flashlight, but this light was way too big and the wrong color. The weirdest part was how it moved. It wasn't darting around or anything, it just sort of floated there, gently bobbing up and down like it was suspended in water. I remember freezing mid-brush, toothpaste foam still in my mouth, just staring at this thing through the crack in the door. My heart started racing, but I couldn't look away. I stood there watching it for what felt like forever, but was probably only about 5 seconds. Then it started moving, not quickly, but deliberately, down the hallway toward my PC room. That's when I heard it. Laughter. A woman's laugh, sounding like she was in her early 20s. It wasn't scary or evil sounding. That almost would have made more sense. Instead, it was light and playful, but with this undertone that felt mocking, like she knew something I didn't. The really freaky part was that I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It seemed to be everywhere at once, not loud, but clear as day. It wasn't coming from outside or from a neighbor's house. It was right there, all around me. I still remember exactly how it sounded, not like any laugh I've ever heard. It had this musical quality to it, almost like wind chimes, but definitely human, and it wasn't a full-on laugh, more like a soft heh that lasted maybe 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds changed everything. That laugh snapped me out of my frozen state. I spat out the toothpaste, wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, and bolted into the hallway. The blue light was gone by then, but I swear I could still feel something in the air. It's hard to explain, but the hallway felt charged somehow, like the air after a lightning strike. I ran to the PC room, flipping on every light switch along the way. Nothing. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Computer off, chair pushed in, nothing out of place. I checked the closet, looked under the desk, even checked the windows to make sure they were locked. They were. I searched the entire house, every room, every closet, behind every door. Nothing was disturbed, no one was there, no sign of any blue light. I even went outside to check around the house, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank. But it was just a quiet Tuesday night, no one around. The strangest part of all this? I wasn't scared, at least not in the moment. I should have been terrified. I'm usually the first one to get freaked out by horror movies or ghost stories. But that night, After searching the house and finding nothing, I just felt curious, almost calm. I went to bed around 11 and slept like a rock. No nightmares, no waking up in a cold sweat, nothing. It wasn't until the next morning that the fear hit me. I woke up around 7, and the memory of what happened came flooding back, and suddenly my heart was pounding. I sat up in bed, covered in sweat, wondering if I'd dreamed the whole thing, but I knew I hadn't. It was too vivid, too specific. That blue light and that laugh were burned into my memory. When Megan came home later that day, I tried to tell her what happened. She looked at me like I was crazy or playing a joke on her. She suggested maybe I'd fallen asleep at my computer and dreamed it, or that it was the neighbor's TV. I know what I saw, though. I started researching online, looking up blue orb ghost and disembodied laughter, and went down this whole rabbit hole of paranormal forums. Some of the stories I found were similar to mine, but nothing quite matched what I experienced. I've been trying to find logical explanations. Maybe it was a reflection from something outside, but there's no way to explain that laugh. It wasn't coming from a TV or radio. We don't even have one in that part of the house, and it definitely wasn't Megan, who was 30 miles away at her sister's. I checked her location on our phones later just to be sure. The house isn't old. No history of deaths or anything like that. I even asked our landlord if anyone had ever reported anything strange in the house. He just laughed and said no, not that he knew of. I tried to figure out if the voice could have belonged to anyone I knew who had passed away. My grandma died when I was in college, but she was in her 70s, and this was definitely a young woman's voice. No female friends or relatives who died young. Nobody whose laugh would sound like that. For the next few weeks, I kept expecting something else to happen. I'd come home from work and pause in the doorway, half expecting to see that blue light again. I started leaving lights on at night, even though I felt silly doing it. I'd find myself staring at the hallway while brushing my teeth, the bathroom door wide open now. But nothing happened. No blue lights, no laughter, nothing out of the ordinary at all. I've always been skeptical about paranormal stuff. I'm the guy who watches ghost hunting shows just to laugh at how ridiculous they are. I always thought there was a logical explanation for everything. Now, I'm not so sure. It's been 6 months, and I still think about it almost every day. What was that blue light? Whose laugh was that? Was it a ghost? Some kind of energy? Was it trying to communicate with me? Why me? Why that night? What really gets me is how ordinary everything about that night was until it wasn't. I was just a regular dude brushing his teeth on a Tuesday. Then suddenly, for a few brief seconds, it felt like reality shifted. Like a curtain was pulled back for just a moment, letting me glimpse something I wasn't supposed to see. The strangest part is that I want it to happen again. As freaky as it was, part of me hopes that blue light will come back, that I'll hear that laugh again. Maybe next time I'll be brave enough to say something, to ask what it wants. But so far, nothing. Not a single weird thing has happened in the house since. Sometimes I wonder if it was all in my head. Maybe I was more tired than I realized that night. Maybe my brain just glitched for a few seconds, but deep down, I know what I saw and heard was real. I still live in the same house. Megan and I are still together, though she thinks I just had some kind of weird half-asleep hallucination that night. Maybe she's right, but I can still see that blue light when I close my eyes, still hear that laugh like it was yesterday. Whatever it was, it felt like it was trying to get my attention specifically, like it chose me for some reason. And that's the part that keeps me up at night sometimes. Not fear that it might come back, but wondering why it came at all and what would have happened if I'd tried to communicate with it instead of running to investigate. I don't know if I'll ever get answers. Maybe that's the point. Some things just can't be explained. But I know what I experienced, and nothing will ever convince me it wasn't real. For those few seconds, something from beyond our normal reality reached out and made itself known to me, and I'll never forget it. Story 2. I never thought I'd share this online, but I need to get this off my chest. It's been eating me up inside for too long. I'm 16, and my mom started working late shifts about 6 months ago. That's when everything changed in our house. We live in this old farmhouse in rural Missouri. Nothing fancy, just a single-story place with 3 bedrooms, surrounded by fields and some woods about half a mile back. It's always been peaceful here, at least until recently. Last Thursday was when it got really bad. Mom had left for her shift around 2 in the afternoon, and I was alone watching some stupid reality show in the living room. I wasn't really paying attention, just scrolling through my phone while the TV played in the background. That's when I felt this weird sensation, like someone was watching me. You know that feeling when the hair on your arm stands up? Like that, but worse. I looked up from my phone and almost screamed. Standing just a few feet away from the couch was this tall, black shadow. It wasn't like a normal shadow cast by furniture or anything. It was standing there, completely solid and dark, like a person-shaped void. My first thought was that Mom had come home early and was standing in the hallway, but when I looked directly at it, it just disappeared. Like 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. I sat there frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept telling myself I was just tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew what I saw. After a few minutes of trying to calm myself down, I started seeing more things. White faces peeking around the corner of the hallway. More black shadows moving at the edge of my vision. I'd turn to look and they'd vanish, but as soon as I looked away, I could feel them watching me again. I ended up turning on every light in the house and blasting music just to feel less alone. I texted Mom, but she couldn't come home. They were short-staffed at the hospital, so I just had to deal with it until she got back at midnight. That night was the worst. I tried to sleep, but around 1 in the morning, I heard this bell ringing. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet house, it might as well have been an alarm. The only bell in my room is this small decorative one my grandma gave me years ago. It sits on a shelf near my closet, the same closet where I often see her. The ghostly girl, I mean. She's small, maybe 8 or 9, with this old-fashioned white nightgown. I've seen her so many times standing there just watching me that I've almost gotten used to her. Almost. I sat up in bed, heart racing again, and stared at the closet. The bell had stopped ringing, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. My cats were both sleeping at the foot of my bed, so it wasn't them. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. Nothing was there, but all night long I kept seeing these cat shadows moving around my room. At first I was terrified, but then I recognized their shapes. One was Handsome, my dark brown tabby who died last year from kidney failure. The other was Onyx, my black cat who got hit by a car when I was 12. I'd know their silhouettes anywhere. The way Handsome's tail had that little kink near the end, or how Onyx always moved with this confident strut. It's weird, but seeing them actually made me feel safer. Unlike the human shadows, these animal spirits don't scare me. It's like they're still trying to protect me. Even now, the animal spirits are new, but I've been seeing the human ones since I was 5. The first time was during sleep paralysis. I woke up but couldn't move, and there they were. 2 teenage girls around 12 or 13, standing at the foot of my bed, an older lady near my dresser, and a man in the corner. They were all wearing white like old-fashioned nightgowns, except the man who was in dark clothes. I remember every detail of that night, the way the moonlight came through my curtains, the sound of the wind outside, and the absolute certainty that what I was seeing was real. The man disappeared after that night, but the others became regular visitors. I even named them. The girls are Abigail and Abby, and there's a little boy who started appearing later that I call Charlie. He's maybe 6 or 7, with this mop of brown hair and sad eyes. I'm not the only one who's seen them either. My cousin stayed over last summer and saw the man outside in the yard, just standing there staring at the house. She also heard children's voices saying hello and hi when we were alone in the house. That freaked her out so bad she refuses to stay over anymore. The worst part is when they touch me. It's only happened 3 times, but each time was absolutely terrifying. Twice when I was in the shower, something poked me through the curtain, like a finger jabbing my shoulder. There was nobody there when I yanked the curtain back, heart pounding, water still running. The 3rd time was while I was sleeping. I felt a hand press against my back. right between my shoulder blades. It was cold and heavy, and I couldn't move or scream. I just lay there, tears streaming down my face, until it finally lifted. Summer camping trips with my family are the absolute worst. There's this spot near a lake where we go every year, and I always see things in the woods. Last summer, I saw what looked like a Mothman, this tall, winged figure with glowing red eyes watching us from between the trees. My dad said it was probably just a deer reflecting our campfire in its eyes, but deer don't stand 7 feet tall on 2 legs. Another time, I was walking back from the bathroom facility to our campsite when I saw a man hiding in the bushes. I froze, and he charged at me, running full speed. I screamed and ran back to our campsite, but when my parents went to look, there was nobody there, no footprints, nothing disturbed in the bushes, just the normal night sounds of the forest. The creepiest was when something crawled out from under my uncle's car on all 4s. It wasn't a person or an animal. It moved wrong, like its joints bent in impossible ways. I only saw it for a second before it disappeared into the trees, but that image is burned into my brain. My parents have seen some things too, though they don't like to talk about it. Mom has admitted to seeing shadows right before objects fall, like the time our kitchen cabinet door swung open on its own and a glass flew out and shattered. She said she saw a black shadow dart past just before it happened. Dad's more skeptical, but even he can't explain the footsteps we all hear upstairs when nobody's up there. The hallway connecting our bedrooms seems to be where most of the activity happens. I consistently see 2 different shadow figures there. Mom says she's seen a black shadow head at the top of the hallway, while I always see a white face with very distinct features, hollow eyes, a thin mouth, and no nose. It's terrifying, but over time I've started to sense that these entities don't want to hurt us. It's more like they enjoy the company of the living who can actually see them. Last night was the worst yet. Mom was working again, and I was alone doing homework in my room. Around 9, all 3 of my bedroom lights flickered and went out, but the rest of the house still had power. I grabbed my phone flashlight and went to check the breaker box in the hallway. That's when I saw them all. Not just glimpses or shadows, but fully formed. Abigail and Abby standing hand in hand at the end of the hallway. The old woman sitting in my mom's rocking chair. Charlie peeking out from behind the bathroom door. And the man, the one I hadn't seen since I was 5, standing right in front of the breaker box. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, my phone's flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. The man stepped aside, gesturing to the breaker box like he was being polite. When I didn't move, Charlie came out from behind the door and walked over to me. He reached up and took my free hand. His hand was cold, but solid. Not like mist or anything, but like touching someone who's been outside in winter without gloves. He tugged gently, leading me to the breaker box. The others just watched, not moving, not speaking. When I got to the breaker box, I flipped the switch for my room, and immediately the lights came back on. I turned around, and they were all gone. Vanished. All except for Charlie, who was standing at the entrance to my room. He smiled. Not in a creepy way, but like he was happy to help. And then he faded away too. I ran back to my room and locked the door, pushing my desk chair against it for good measure. I called Mom in tears, and she left work early to come home. By the time she got here, everything was quiet again. She checked the house, told me it was probably just my imagination working overtime, and that the power outage was just a coincidence. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Charlie's hand in mine was real. The weirdest part? I checked our family history online this morning. This house was built in the 1950s by a family named Miller. They had 2 teenage daughters, a young son, and the grandmother lived with them. The son, Charles Miller, drowned in the creek behind our property in 1962. He was 6 years old. I don't know what to do. Mom doesn't believe me, or at least pretends not to. I can't move out. I'm only 16, but they're getting more bold, more physical. Last night proved they can touch me, interact with me. What will they want next? I'm sitting in my room right now, writing this. My cats are acting weird, staring at empty corners and hissing at nothing. And just now, as I'm typing this, I swear I heard a child's laugh from my closet. Story 3 dots. I've never told this story to many people because it sounds crazy even to me, and I was the one who lived through it. But I need to get this off my chest because even now, 4 years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. I was 22 when it happened. I'd always been afraid of the dark, which sounds childish, I know. My friends used to tease me about it. "Amelia, you're too old for this," they'd say. But I couldn't help it. When the lights went out, my brain would start playing tricks on me. I'd see shapes moving in the corners, shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Normal stuff that everyone probably experiences, right? But what happened in my parents' house was different. So different that I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It started on a Monday. I remember because I had just gotten back from a late shift at the cafe where I worked. I was exhausted and just wanted to crash. When I turned off my bedroom light and got into bed, I noticed something in the corner of my ceiling, where the walls met. It was darker there than it should have been, like a concentration of shadow. At first, I rationalized it. Maybe it was just the way the streetlight was coming through my window, creating weird shadows. I pulled my covers up and tried to ignore it, eventually falling asleep. The next night, I noticed it again. Only this time, the dark spot seemed bigger and darker somehow. I tried turning on different lights in my room to see if it would change the shadow, but nothing affected it. That little patch of darkness remained, defying the laws of light and shadow that I understood. By Wednesday, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The shadow had spread along the corner of my ceiling, stretching about 2 feet in each direction. But what really freaked me out wasn't its size, it was the feeling it gave off. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt unwelcome, like the air itself was rejecting you? That's what it felt like when I looked at that corner, a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature. I tried talking to my mom about it on Thursday morning. "Mom, does my room feel weird to you?" I asked while we were having breakfast. She just gave me that look parents give when they think you're being dramatic. "What do you mean weird?" "I don't know, just off, especially in the corner by my desk." She came up to check, stood in my room for all of 30 seconds, and shrugged. "Seems fine to me, honey. Maybe open a window. It's a bit stuffy." But it wasn't stuffy. It was heavy, like the air in that corner of my room had turned to molasses, thick with something I couldn't name but instinctively feared. That night, I couldn't sleep in my room. The shadow had grown again, and now it seemed to pulse slightly, like it was breathing. I know how that sounds, but I swear that's what it looked like. And the feeling of malevolence coming from it was so strong I felt nauseous. I grabbed my pillow and blanket and went to my parents' room. "Can I sleep on your floor tonight?" I asked, feeling like a 5-year-old. My dad grumbled something about me being too old for this, but my mom made space. I didn't tell them why. How could I explain that a shadow in my room felt evil? They'd think I was losing it. Friday was when things got really bad. I went into my room to get clothes for the day, and the shadow had spread across the entire ceiling. The room felt frigid despite it being summer, and the feeling coming from it, I can't even describe it properly. It was hatred. Pure, concentrated hatred directed at me. I grabbed what I needed and ran out, slamming the door behind me. I spent that whole day avoiding my room. When I needed something, I'd open the door, rush in with my eyes fixed on the floor, grab what I needed, and bolt out. Each time I could feel it watching me, the pressure of its attention like a physical weight on my shoulders. By Saturday, I couldn't even approach that side of the house without feeling a wave of fear so intense my legs would shake. The malevolence had somehow seeped through the walls, creating a perimeter of dread around my bedroom. I slept on the couch that night, telling my parents I'd fallen asleep watching TV. Then came Sunday, the day it all came to a head. My parents had a dinner reservation and asked me to watch my younger brothers, ages 12 and 14. They were old enough to not need much supervision, so I agreed, thinking we'd just play video games or watch a movie. Everything was fine at first. We were in the living room, the boys arguing over which game to play next. I was on the couch, scrolling through my phone with my back to the kitchen. Our living room and kitchen are connected in an open floor plan with just a counter separating them. It happened so suddenly. One moment I was fine, and the next I felt it. Someone was standing directly behind me. Not my brothers, they were right in front of me. This was something else. Something watching me from just inches away. The feeling was so intense, so real, that my hair stood on end. You know that feeling when someone's staring at you and you can just tell? Multiply that by 1,000. Add in the most hostile, vile intention you can imagine. Whatever was behind me didn't just dislike me, it wanted to hurt me, to destroy me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My chest tightened like it was caught in a vice. The air turned ice cold, and I swear I could feel something's breath on the back of my neck. The most terrifying part, I knew exactly what it was. The shadow from my room had somehow evolved, grown stronger, and now it wasn't confined to that corner anymore. I managed to turn my head just slightly. There was nothing visible there, but the emptiness itself seemed wrong, like reality was warped in that spot. The malevolence was so thick I could almost see it, a distortion in the air like heat waves off hot asphalt. I don't remember screaming, but my brothers said I did. A high, panicked sound that made them drop their controllers. What I do remember is fumbling for my phone, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called my parents, hyperventilating so hard I couldn't get words out at first. "It's here," I finally managed to gasp. "In the kitchen. Please come home. Please." My dad, to his credit, didn't ask questions. "We're on our way," he said, and hung up. Those 20 minutes waiting for them were the longest of my life. I gathered my brothers and made them sit with me on the front porch. They thought I was crazy, but something in my face must have scared them enough to listen. When my parents' car pulled up, I was still shaking. My mom took one look at me and went pale. "What happened?" she asked, putting her arms around me. I told them everything, about the shadow in my room, how it had grown, the feeling of evil it gave off, and finally, about the presence I'd felt behind me in the kitchen. I expected them to dismiss it, to tell me I was imagining things or having anxiety attacks. Instead, my dad got very quiet. After a long moment, he said, "I never blessed the house when we moved in. Now, we're Mormon, or at least we were raised that way. I consider myself more spiritual than religious these days, but my dad is still pretty devout. In our faith, it's common to bless a new home, asking for protection and peace within its walls. My dad had apparently meant to do this when we moved in 2 years ago, but had forgotten. Without another word, he walked toward my bedroom. My mom tried to stop him, but he shook her off. I couldn't bring myself to follow. I stayed in the living room, hugging my knees to my chest, as my dad entered my room alone. I don't know exactly what he did in there. He was gone for about 10 minutes. When he came out, he looked drained, but calm. I said a prayer, he told us simply. Asked for whatever was in there to leave. I didn't go back into my room that night. I couldn't. But the next morning, something had changed. The heaviness in the air was gone. I cautiously approached my bedroom door, half expecting to feel that wave of dread again. But there was nothing. When I finally worked up the courage to look inside, the shadow was gone from the corner. My room felt like just a room again. It's been 4 years, and I've never experienced anything like that since. I moved out of my parents' house a year later, and my new apartment has never had any weird vibes or shadows. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was a prolonged panic attack. Maybe there was a gas leak that caused hallucinations. Maybe my fear of the dark finally manifested into something my brain interpreted as real. But none of those explanations feel right. What I experienced that Sunday night was real. The evil was real. I felt it, as tangible as the couch I'm sitting on right now as I type this. I still don't know what it was or why it chose my room, my home, me. I don't know if my dad's prayer actually banished it or if it just decided to leave. All I know is that it was the most malevolent presence I've ever encountered. And sometimes when I'm alone in the dark, I still check the corners of my ceiling, just in case. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. Honestly, I'm still shaken up about the whole thing, and typing this makes my hands clammy. But I need to get this off my chest. and maybe warn others about messing with things they don't understand. I sure as hell didn't. This happened last October in Portsmouth, where I've lived my entire life. It's one of those small historic towns where everyone knows each other's business, and old buildings have those little plaques telling you they were built in the 1700s. My family's house isn't quite that old, but it's been around since the 1920s, all creaky floorboards and drafty windows. My sisters, Emma and Lily, both younger than me, found this old Ouija board at a yard sale about a mile from our place. Some old lady was selling her deceased husband's stuff, and this thing was buried in a box of board games. It looked ancient, not one of those mass-produced Hasbro ones, but something handmade with dark polished wood and letters that had this faded yellow tint to them. I'd always been fascinated by paranormal stuff. I'd binge-watch ghost hunting shows and read creepypastas online until 3 in the morning. So when my sisters brought home that board, I was more excited than concerned. Looking back, I should have known better. They tried using it a few times without me. Emma, who's 19, and Lily, who just turned 17, would sit in Emma's room with the lights off and a couple of candles burning, asking if anyone was there. Nothing happened. The planchette never moved an inch. "It's just a stupid piece of wood," Emma told me after their third attempt. "Complete waste of $10. I remember laughing and saying something like, "Maybe the ghosts just don't like you." One Friday night, about 3 weeks ago, my parents were away for the weekend at some bed and breakfast celebrating their anniversary. Emma suggested we try the board again, but this time with all 3 of us. "Nathan should join us," she said. "Maybe we need a boy's energy or something." I rolled my eyes but agreed. We set everything up in our living room around 9 p.m. We pushed the coffee table against the wall and sat in a triangle on the floor. Emma had placed 3 white candles around us and we dimmed the lights. The board sat between us on the hardwood floor. When we all placed our fingers on the planchette, the difference was immediate. It felt warm, almost vibrating beneath my fingertips. Within seconds of asking, "Is anyone there?" the pointer slid to "Yes." Emma gasped. "Are you moving it?" she whispered. I shook my head. Lily looked terrified already. "Who are we speaking with?" Emma asked. The planchette moved slowly. Q-U-A-Y. "Key?" I repeated. "Like a dock?" No response. "Are you good or bad?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. The planchette circled the board twice before landing on "Goodbye." We tried again a few minutes later. This time the entity called itself QUO. The answers were mostly gibberish, just random letters strung together that made no sense. The third time, something called Key responded but only answered maybe to every question. After my sisters went to bed around midnight, I stayed downstairs. I couldn't stop thinking about the board. There was something addictive about that feeling when the planchette moved on its own. It was like a rush of adrenaline mixed with dread. I decided to try it alone. I know that's breaking rule number 1 of Ouija boards. Everyone knows you're never supposed to use them by yourself. But I convinced myself that since we'd only contacted confusing, seemingly harmless entities, what was the worst that could happen? I set up 5 candles this time, 1 in each corner of the board and 1 in the center. The house was completely silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood. I placed my fingers lightly on the planchette. "Is anyone there?" I asked. Nothing happened. I waited about 5 minutes, asking again and again. The planchette remained still. That's when I remembered something I'd read in an online forum years ago. There's supposedly an entity associated with Ouija boards called Zozo. People claimed it was dangerous to call on it directly, that it was some kind of demonic presence. In my frustration at getting no response, I made the stupidest decision of my life. I deliberately spelled out ZOZO with the planchette. The moment I finished, the air in the room changed. It felt heavier, colder. The center candle's flame shot up unnaturally high, almost a foot tall, burning bright blue at its core. I'd never seen anything like it before. The planchette began moving immediately without me even asking a question. It spelled out, Hello, Nathan. My blood ran cold. I hadn't introduced myself. Who are you? I asked, my mouth dry. Friend, what's your name? Many names. Are you Zozo? The planchette circled the board 3 times, faster than before stopping on yes. What do you want? To talk to you, psychic. I swallowed hard. I'm not psychic. Yes, you are, fallen angel. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Are you an angel? The planchette moved to no, then quickly to yes, then back to no again. What are you then? Watcher. Are you good or evil? The planchette didn't move for several seconds. Then, good, evil. Same. Is God real? I don't know why I asked this, it just came out. No God, only us. My hands were shaking so badly I almost broke contact with the planchette. Us? Who else is there? Many waiting. Waiting for what? You opened door. The center candle flickered violently, casting weird shadows across the walls that seemed to move independently of the flame. Are you here in this room with me? Always been here. That's when things got even weirder. Without me asking anything, the planchette started moving again. Emma is whore. I jerked my hands away. Don't talk about my sister like that. I was about to put the board away when the planchette moved on its own. Without my fingers on it, it dragged itself to sorry, and then, angel trying to reach you. Against my better judgment, I put my fingers back on it. If you're an angel, what's your name? Azrael. Even with my limited religious knowledge, that name sent chills down my spine. Azrael is sometimes associated with the angel of death. What do you want from me? See you. What does that mean? You can see me? More than see. I think I need to stop now, I said out loud. No, I'm saying goodbye. Never goodbye. I forcibly moved the planchette to goodbye and removed my hands. The center candle extinguished itself with a hiss, sending a plume of black smoke spiraling toward the ceiling. The other 4 candles remained lit. I packed up the board with shaking hands and shoved it into the back of a closet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the house made me jump. I kept feeling like someone was standing in the dark corners of my bedroom, watching me. The next few days were relatively normal, though I felt on edge constantly. I didn't tell my sisters about my solo session. I actually convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, or at least exaggerated it in my mind. Then, 5 days later, it happened. I was taking a hot shower after getting home from work. The bathroom was steamy as usual. When I stepped out and reached for my towel, I froze. There on the bathroom mirror, drawn in the condensation, was a perfect pentagram. I'm not talking about a simple star. This was an intricate pentagram with symbols around the edges that I didn't recognize. It couldn't have been there when I got in the shower. I would have noticed it, and no one else was home. It had been drawn while I was showering. I freaked out completely. I didn't even dry off properly. Just frantically wiped away the symbol with my hand, threw on whatever clothes were nearest, and ran out of the bathroom. I spent the rest of the evening in the living room with all the lights on, jumping at every sound. Since then, I've been experiencing other things. Objects moving when I'm not looking, my name being whispered when I'm alone. Last night, I woke up at 3:33 in the morning to find all my dresser drawers open and my clothes neatly laid out on the floor in the shape of a cross. I've tried researching how to close whatever door I opened, but there's so much conflicting information online. Some sites say to burn the board, which I'm terrified to do. Others say that makes it worse. Some suggest blessing the house, but I'm not religious and wouldn't even know where to start. The most terrifying part is that I feel like it's getting stronger, like it's learning how to affect the physical world more effectively. Sometimes I catch glimpses of a shadow figure in my peripheral vision, taller than any normal person should be. I haven't told anyone else about this. My family would think I'm losing it. Maybe I am. But the pentagram on the mirror? There's no way I could have imagined that. I don't know what to do now. I'm afraid to sleep, afraid to be alone, afraid this thing is going to do something worse than draw symbols and move my stuff around. It knows my name, it knows my family, And whatever it is, I invited it in. If you're reading this and have ever thought about messing with a Ouija board, especially alone, please don't make the same mistake I did. Some doors aren't meant to be opened, and I'm starting to think some can never be closed again. Story 5. I still get chills thinking about what happened at that roadside motel in Sea Point last summer. I've tried explaining it to friends, but I always see that look in their eyes, like they think I'm making it up or exaggerating. I'm not. I wish I was. My brother Mark moved to Sea Point about 2 years ago for work. It's this tiny coastal town where everybody knows everybody, the kind of place with one traffic light and a diner where the same people have breakfast every morning. Since he lives in a studio apartment, whenever we visit, we stay at this motel right off the highway, the Sea Point Inn. Nothing fancy, just your basic motel with exterior corridors and those heavy curtains that never fully block out the light. But it was clean and cheap, only $75 a night, which is why we kept going back. That weekend, my parents and I drove up to visit Mark and my 5-year-old niece, Lily. Mark's ex has her most of the time, but he gets her every other weekend. We try to coordinate our visits so we can all see Lily together. We checked in around 4 in the afternoon. The lady at the front desk gave us room 23 at the far end of the building. It was your standard motel room. 2 queen beds, a small round table with 2 chairs by the window, a dresser with a TV on top, and a bathroom with this shower that made this high-pitched whining noise whenever you turned it on. Mark and Lily met us at the motel around 6. We ordered pizza and wings for dinner because we were too tired to go out after the 3-hour drive. Lily was going through this gymnastics phase and kept showing us cartwheels in the narrow space between the beds, almost knocking over the lamp twice. My mom kept telling her to be careful, but you know how kids are when they're excited. We all sat around that small table to eat. It was cramped with the 5 of us, my dad and mom on the 2 chairs, Mark sitting on the edge of one of the beds, and Lily and I cross-legged on the carpet. We had the pizza box in the middle of the table and the wing container on the dresser because there wasn't enough room. I'd just taken a slice of pizza when I realized I forgot to grab the little container of garlic sauce. It was sitting across the table near my mom. I reached for it, but before my fingers could touch it, the sauce container moved. And when I say moved, I don't mean it shifted a little because the table was uneven or something. It slid about 3 inches to the right, like someone had pushed it with their finger. I froze with my hand still outstretched. At first, I thought maybe Lily had bumped the table with her knee or something, but she was busy showing my dad how she could touch her toes while standing on one leg. I looked up at my mom, and she was staring at the sauce container with this expression I'd never seen before, like she couldn't process what she'd just witnessed. Our eyes met, and I knew instantly she'd seen it too. She gave me this slight nod and then glanced around at everyone else, but they were all chatting and eating, completely oblivious. "Did you see that?" I whispered to her. She nodded again, her eyes wide. It just moved on its own. I tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe the table was wet and the container slid on a drop of water. Maybe there was a draft from the air conditioner. I grabbed a napkin and dried the table where the container had been. Nothing. No water, no grease. Nothing that would make it slide like that. I even tried to recreate it. I jumped up and down next to the table to see if vibrations would make it move. Nothing. I shook the table slightly. The pizza box slid a bit, but the sauce container stayed put. I even tried blowing on it. It wouldn't budge unless I physically pushed it. We didn't mention it to the others. What would we say? "Hey, the garlic sauce just moved by itself?" They'd think we were nuts, so we just finished dinner, watched some TV, and eventually Mark took Lily back to his place around 9. I took a shower before bed, placing my face wash, toothbrush, and other toiletries on the small counter beside the sink. The bathroom was tiny. You could practically wash your hands while sitting on the toilet, but it had this really bright light above the mirror that made every blemish on your face stand out. My parents took the bed closer to the bathroom and I took the one by the window. I had trouble falling asleep. partly because I kept thinking about that sauce container, and partly because the people in the next room had their TV on too loud. I must have finally dozed off around midnight. At exactly 3:17 in the morning, I know because I checked my phone when it happened, I was jolted awake by a loud crash coming from the bathroom. My mom gasped and sat up in bed. My dad, always the protector, was already on his feet before I could even process what was happening. "What was that?" my mom whispered, clutching the sheets to her chest. My dad grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. "I'll check." I sat up too, my heart racing. The crash had been loud, like something heavy hitting the wall or floor. My first thought was that maybe the towel rack had fallen off the wall. Those things are never attached properly in cheap motels. My dad pushed open the bathroom door slowly, his phone light sweeping across the small space. I heard him let out a confused, "Huh?" before he flipped on the actual bathroom light. "What is it?" my mom called out, already getting out of bed. My dad bent down to pick something up. When he turned around, he was holding my face wash bottle, the one I'd placed on the counter before going to bed. "Your face wash was on the floor," he said, looking bewildered. "All the way over by the door." The bathroom door was opposite the sink counter, about 6 feet away. For my face wash to get there, it would have had to fly off the counter, across the bathroom, and hit the door with enough force to make that crashing sound we heard. "Maybe it fell and bounced," I suggested, but even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. The bottle was plastic, not heavy enough to make that loud of a noise, even if it had fallen directly onto the tile floor, and it would have had to bounce at an impossible angle to end up by the door. My mom went into the bathroom and looked around. All my other toiletries were still neatly arranged on the counter where I'd left them. Nothing else had moved. "Did you put it near the edge?" she asked me. I shook my head. "No, it was right next to my toothbrush." I pointed to the spot on the counter, a good 6 inches from the edge. My dad, ever the rational one, tried to find a logical explanation. "Maybe the counter is slanted and it rolled off?" He placed the bottle back on the counter and even gave it a slight push. It didn't move. He tried tilting the bottle to see if it would roll. It just tipped over on its side and stayed put. We all stood there in the harsh bathroom light, staring at that stupid face wash bottle like it held the answers to the universe. None of us wanted to say what we were thinking, that this was now the second unexplainable thing that had happened in this room in less than 12 hours. "Let's just go back to sleep," my dad finally said, trying to sound casual but not quite pulling it off. We probably just didn't notice how close it was to the edge. But I could tell he didn't believe that any more than my mom or I did. As we turned off the lights and got back into our beds, there was this heavy silence in the room. I knew none of us would sleep much for the rest of the night. I lay there in the dark, listening to my parents breathing, knowing they were awake too. I kept picturing that face wash bottle flying across the bathroom like someone had thrown it. Combined with the sauce container sliding across the table earlier, it felt like, well, like something was in that room with us, something we couldn't see. Around 5 in the morning, when the first hint of daylight started seeping through the curtains, my mom whispered, "Jane, are you awake?" "Yeah," I whispered back. "Your father's finally asleep. Don't wake him." She was silent for a moment, then, "Remember that sauce container at dinner?" "I've been thinking about it all night," I admitted. "Something's not right in this room," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what, but I don't think we're alone." Those words sent ice down my spine because they perfectly captured what I'd been feeling but had been too afraid to say out loud. We checked out later that morning without mentioning any of it to the front desk lady. What would we say? We visited Mark and Lily as planned, went to the beach, had lunch at the local seafood place, all normal family stuff. But there was this undercurrent of unease between my parents and me, like we'd glimpsed something we weren't supposed to see. We've been back to visit Mark several times since then, and we still stay at the Sea Point Inn because, like I said, it's cheap and convenient. But my mom always specifically requests a room that's not 23. The one time they tried to give us that room again, she flat out refused and said we'd go somewhere else if necessary. The front desk lady gave her a strange look that day and after a moment said, "You're not the first ones, you know." Then she quickly assigned us a different room and wouldn't elaborate when we pressed her for details. I've tried researching the motel's history online, looking for any stories about room 23 or the motel in general, but there's nothing. Just your typical TripAdvisor reviews complaining about lumpy mattresses and noisy air conditioners. I still can't explain what happened that night. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head trying to find some rational explanation, but I know what I saw. I know what my mom saw, and whatever was in room 23 of the Sea Point Inn that night, it wasn't just our imagination. Story 6. I still can't explain what happened in our first apartment together. It's been 3 years, and I get chills just typing this out. My wife Emma and I had just gotten married last summer. Small ceremony, nothing fancy. We were so excited to start our lives together in our own place. After weeks of searching, we found this one-bedroom apartment in Oakwood Heights that seemed perfect. The rent was reasonable, the location was convenient for both our jobs, and it had this charming little patio area where we imagined having coffee every morning. The landlord seemed nice enough, though looking back, I wonder if he knew something. When he showed us around, he breezed through the tour pretty quickly. I remember asking about the storage situation since the apartment was small, and he mentioned there was some extra space in the bedroom closet. I didn't think much of it at the time. Moving day was exhausting but exciting. We didn't have much, just the basics plus wedding gifts. Emma's 2 cats, Milo and Luna, were freaked out by the move, hiding under the bed for most of the day. That first night we ordered pizza, drank cheap champagne on our second-hand couch, and felt like we were finally starting our adult lives. The first few days were normal. We unpacked, arranged furniture, and started settling in. It wasn't until about a week in that we first noticed something off. I was hanging clothes in our bedroom closet when I spotted what looked like a small hatch in the ceiling. A crawl space of some kind. It was about 2 feet wide with a wooden lid that sat flush with the ceiling. "Hey babe, did you notice this?" I called out to Emma. She came in and looked up. "Huh, maybe it's attic access or something." I grabbed a chair and pushed at the lid. It was surprisingly heavy and didn't budge easily. When I finally managed to shift it slightly, a few bits of drywall dust sprinkled down onto the shelf below. "Weird," I said, letting it drop back into place. "It's really heavy for its size." Emma shrugged. "Probably just storage space. We can use it for Christmas decorations or something." I nodded, but something about it made me uneasy. It seemed, I don't know, out of place. The apartment was only on the 2nd floor of a 3-story building, so it wasn't like it led to the roof or anything. That night, we both woke up around 1 in the morning to a scratching sound. Emma nudged me. "Ethan, the cats are tearing something up," she whispered. I groaned and switched on the bedside lamp. Both cats were curled up at the foot of our bed, fast asleep. "They're right here," I said, confused. The scratching stopped. We looked at each other, then around the room. "Must have been from outside," Emma suggested, and I agreed because what else could it be? We went back to sleep, but I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. The next day, we asked our neighbor if they had pets. They didn't. I tried to forget about it, chalking it up to old building noises. By the 3rd week, things got weirder. We'd hear footsteps above us, which made no sense because we were on the top floor of our section of the building. The first time it happened, I thought maybe maintenance workers were on the roof. At 1 in the morning, Emma asked when I suggested this. Good point. No one would be working on the roof that late. The footsteps weren't constant. They'd happen for a few minutes, then stop for days. There was no pattern to them. Sometimes they were slow and measured, other times rapid, like someone was pacing back and forth in a hurry. Then the cabinets started opening. I'd come home from work to find the kitchen cabinet doors slightly ajar. At first I blamed Emma, then the cats. But one afternoon we were both sitting in the living room reading when we heard a soft click from the kitchen. We looked up to see one of the upper cabinets slowly swing open. Both cats were napping on the windowsill. "Did you see that?" Emma whispered, her face pale. I nodded, getting up to check it out. Nothing seemed disturbed inside the cabinet, just our dishes sitting there as usual. I closed it firmly and checked the hinges. They seemed fine. Maybe it's not balanced right, I suggested, not believing my own explanation. The next incident happened in the bathroom. Emma had placed a small decorative box on the counter to hold hair ties and bobby pins. She came out of the shower one morning to find it flipped onto its side, contents spilled across the counter. "Ethan, did you knock this over?" she called out. "I was making coffee in the kitchen." "No, I haven't been in there since you went in to shower." The bathroom door had been closed the whole time. The cats couldn't have gotten in. We started keeping a mental list of the strange occurrences, trying to rationalize each one. The footsteps were the building settling. The cabinets had faulty hinges. The box in the bathroom, maybe vibrations from the shower, but deep down we knew these explanations were bullshit. Emma started noticing something else, strange light patterns on the hallway ceiling at night. Not like car headlights or anything easily explained. More like small, localized flickers of light that seemed to materialize from nowhere and then vanish. I only saw them once, and it freaked me out so badly I couldn't sleep afterward. They looked almost like someone was shining a small flashlight through water, creating these rippling patterns. We started sleeping poorly. Both of us would jolt awake at random times, feeling like someone was watching us. The cats seemed on edge too, staring at empty corners and hissing at nothing. Then came the night that pushed us over the edge. We were watching a movie in the living room, trying to have a normal Friday night. Both cats were with us, Luna on Emma's lap and Milo stretched out on the floor. It was around 9:30 when we heard a loud bang from the bedroom. Not a subtle noise, not something we could ignore or explain away. A loud, deliberate bang, like someone had slammed their hand against a wall. Emma jumped, grabbing my arm. What was that? I paused the movie, listening. The apartment was dead silent. Even the cats were alert now, staring toward the bedroom door. "Stay here," I said, getting up. "I keep a handgun in a lockbox in our living room cabinet. Legal, registered, all that." I grabbed it, checking that it was loaded. "Ethan, be careful," Emma whispered, pulling her knees to her chest. I moved slowly down the hallway, gun pointed at the floor. The bedroom door was partially open, just as we'd left it earlier. I pushed it with my foot, scanning the room as it swung open. Nothing looked disturbed at first glance. No signs of an intruder. The window was still locked. I checked under the bed, behind the curtains, in the corners. Nothing. Then I looked at the closet. The door was open wider than we normally kept it. My heart pounding, I approached slowly. When I reached the closet, I saw it immediately. The crawl space lid was askew, not fully removed, but definitely moved from its normal position. There was a fresh dusting of drywall on the shelf below it, and the lid was sitting about 2 inches ajar. I froze, staring up at it. There was no way that lid could have moved on its own. It had been heavy enough that I had struggled to shift it that first day. "Ethan," Emma called from the living room. "Are you okay?" "Stay there," I called back, my voice tighter than I intended. I grabbed the desk chair and positioned it under the crawl space. Standing on it, gun still in one hand, I used my other hand to push the lid further aside. It slid heavily, more drywall dust showering down. With my heart hammering in my chest, I pointed my phone's flashlight into the opening, half expecting to see someone, or something, staring back at me. The space was empty and small, too small for a person to fit inside. It extended maybe 3 feet in each direction before hitting what looked like concrete supports. There were some electrical wires, a bit of insulation, and a lot of dust. Nothing else. I slid the lid back into place, my hands shaking. It didn't make sense. The lid was too heavy for a cat to move, and even if they somehow had, they couldn't have gotten up there and back down without us noticing. And the space itself was too small for a person to hide in. When I came back to the living room, Emma took one look at my face and knew. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "The crawl space lid was moved," I said, sitting down heavily beside her. "But there's nothing up there. No one could fit in that space." We sat in silence for a minute, both processing what this meant. Could someone have broken in while we were out and left? She suggested. The door was locked when we got home, and so were all the windows. Plus, why would a burglar just move the crawl space lid and not take anything? That night, we slept in the living room with all the lights on. Neither of us was willing to go back in the bedroom. The next morning, in daylight, we did a thorough inspection of the entire apartment, looking for any possible explanation. We found nothing. Emma called her friend who was into Wiccan stuff, asking her to come do a cleansing. I contacted a pastor from my parents' church, figuring we needed all the help we could get. We were scheduled to have them both come the following weekend. But that night, things escalated. We were in the kitchen making dinner when every cabinet door in the kitchen simultaneously flew open. Not slowly, not partially. They banged open, like someone had yanked each one with force. Emma screamed and dropped the plate she was holding. I stood there frozen, staring at the open cabinets. Before either of us could move, we heard that scratching sound again, but this time it was coming from inside the walls. It moved rapidly, circling the kitchen, then down the hallway toward the bedroom. "We need to leave," Emma said, her voice shaking. "Now." We didn't even pack bags. We grabbed the cats, our phones, wallets, and car keys, and we were out the door in under 2 minutes. We spent the night at a hotel 10 miles away. The next day, we called the landlord and broke our lease. We told him the truth, that something was wrong with the apartment. He didn't seem surprised. He just asked when we'd be removing our belongings. No questions about what happened, no defense of the property, nothing. We went back once in broad daylight with Emma's brother and his friend to help us pack and move everything out in a single day. Nothing happened while they were there. The crawl space lid was back in its proper place. The cabinets all stayed closed, no mysterious noises or lights. It was like the apartment was on its best behavior while we had witnesses. As we were doing our final walkthrough, making sure we hadn't forgotten anything, I found myself alone in the bedroom for a moment. I stared up at that crawl space, wondering if I should look one last time. Before I could decide, I heard a soft sound, like someone exhaling slowly, come from behind the lid. I didn't check. I didn't tell Emma. I just closed the bedroom door and left that place forever. It's been 3 years. We live in a house now on the other side of the state. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear scratching in the walls or footsteps above us. Emma says she does too. We don't talk about the apartment much, but sometimes I catch her looking at the ceiling corners of our new home as if checking for something. I still don't know what was in our first apartment together. I don't want to know. He started sleeping in his parents' room because something would pull his hair and scratch his back at night. Her parents tried to rationalize everything: old house, overactive imaginations, sleep paralysis. But they eventually moved across town when I was 13. I thought whatever was happening would stop once they moved. It didn't. Whenever Maya and I would get together, at my house, at the mall, anywhere, weird stuff would follow us. Our phones would die simultaneously despite being fully charged. We'd hear whispers that sounded like they were coming from right behind us, but no one would be there. The temperature would drop randomly in whatever room we were in. What's strange is that these things only happen when we're together. Not when we're with other friends, not when we're apart. Just when it's the two of us. It's like our friendship activates something. Last Friday, Maya came over to my place for the weekend. My parents were out of town visiting my grandparents, and I thought it would be fun to hang out like old times. She arrived around 4 in the afternoon, and everything was normal for the first hour or so. We were catching up, laughing about college. We go to different schools now, and planning what movies to watch. Around 5:30, we went to the kitchen to make dinner. I was getting pasta out of the cabinet when the lights in the kitchen went out. Just the kitchen. The living room lights were still on. The microwave clock was still lit. Everything else in the house had power. I checked the circuit breaker, but nothing was tripped. The kitchen lights came back on by themselves about 10 minutes later. Maya looked at me with that expression I've seen 1,000 times. Part fear, part resignation. "It's starting again," she said quietly. We tried to ignore it and keep our evening normal. We made spaghetti, watched a comedy on Netflix, and avoided talking about the lights. Around 9, we were sitting on the couch when my TV started cycling through inputs on its own. It would switch to HDMI 1, then HDMI 2, then back to Netflix over and over. I unplugged it, waited a minute, then plugged it back in. It worked fine after that, but the damage was done. We were both on edge. At 11, we decided to try to get some sleep. I set up the air mattress in my room for Maya. As I was inflating it, we both froze. There was a distinct sound coming from the dining room, the squeak of someone sitting in one of the wooden chairs. My parents' house is old, and those chairs make a very specific noise when weight is put on them. "Did you hear that?" Maya whispered. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The squeaking continued, like someone was rocking slightly in the chair. We stayed frozen in my bedroom for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, I gathered my courage and said we should check it out together. We crept down the hallway, clutching each other's hands so tight our knuckles were white. The dining room light was off, but there was enough illumination from the street lamps outside to see the chairs around the table. None of them were moving. The squeaking had stopped. I flipped on the light, half expecting to see someone sitting there. The room was empty, but one of the chairs was pulled out from the table, as if someone had just gotten up from it. "I swear to God, I pushed all these in after dinner," I said, my voice shaking. "You saw me do it." Maya nodded, her face pale. "I know. I watched you." We went back to my room and shut the door. Neither of us mentioned going back to check on the chair again. We both knew it would be pushed in if we looked, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something. A sigh, a whisper, footsteps in the hallway. Around 3 in the morning, Maya sat bolt upright on her air mattress. "Something's watching us," she said, staring at my closet. The door was open just a crack, though I always keep it closed. I turned on my bedside lamp and we stayed awake until sunrise, talking about nothing important, both pretending we weren't terrified. In the morning light, things seemed less scary. We made coffee and tried to laugh off the night before. That's when Maya noticed it. 3 angry red scratches on my shoulder blade, visible where my tank top didn't cover. They stung when I touched them. "Let me see your back," I said to her, suddenly remembering all those childhood incidents. She lifted her shirt, and there they were, identical scratches, in the exact same pattern as mine, in the same location. This was new. We'd experienced plenty of creepy things over the years, but synchronized injuries? That had never happened before. "What is it about us?" Maya asked, her voice cracking. "Why does this only happen when we're together? We're not doing anything to cause it." I didn't have an answer. I still don't. But I have theories. Some days, I think there's something attached to one of us that feeds off our combined energy. Other days, I wonder if we accidentally opened something when we were kids. A door to somewhere else that never fully closed. The most disturbing theory I have is that maybe we're doing it ourselves somehow, that together we have some ability we can't control. What happened next made me finally decide to share our story. We were sitting at the kitchen table discussing the scratches when my phone rang. It was Maya's mom, which was weird because she rarely calls me. "Is Maya with you?" she asked, sounding worried. "Yeah, she's right here," I said, confused. "We've been hanging out since yesterday." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's not possible," her mom said slowly. "Maya's been in the hospital since Thursday night. She had her appendix removed yesterday morning." I looked up at Maya sitting across from me, watching me with a slight smile that suddenly didn't look quite right. Her eyes seemed darker somehow. "I have to go," I whispered into the phone and hung up. "Who was that?" asked the thing that looked like Maya, its head tilting at an angle that made my skin crawl. I ran. I grabbed my car keys and just ran out of the house. I drove straight to the hospital and found Maya there, groggy from pain medication, definitely post-surgery. She was shocked to see me. We hadn't made any plans to meet up because of her emergency surgery. When I got home hours later, trembling and escorted by my parents, who I'd called in hysterics, the house was empty. No sign of whatever had been pretending to be Maya. No scratches on the dining room chair, nothing out of place. But the scratches on my back are still there, 5 days later. Maya and I have decided to take a break from seeing each other. It's the hardest decision we've ever made. She's been my best friend for 15 years. But we're scared of what might happen next time. Whatever this thing is, it's escalating. I don't know if keeping apart will stop it. Maybe it's just biding its time. Maybe it's found a way to exist without us now. I check under my bed every night, and I've started sleeping with my closet door locked. If anyone has experienced something similar or knows what might be happening, please tell me. I can't shake the feeling that whatever has been following us all these years finally found a way to become one of us. Story 8. I still can't sleep right. It's been 3 weeks since my cousin Rahul passed away, and I swear something followed me home from his funeral. I've never been superstitious, but what happened that day has changed everything I believe about life and death. Rahul had been sick for months, cancer. By the end, he was just skin and bones. His once muscular frame wasted away until I barely recognized him. Our family is close-knit. He was more like a brother to me than a cousin. When the call came that he didn't have much time left, I immediately dropped everything and rode my motorcycle to my uncle's house in the village. I arrived just in time. The mood in the house was somber, with relatives gathered around, some crying quietly, others praying. My aunt guided me to the bedroom where Rahul lay on a simple cotton mattress on the floor, as is customary in our village when someone is near death. His breathing was labored, coming in shallow gasps. I knelt beside him and took his hand. His skin felt paper-thin and cool to the touch. Nothing like the warm grip I remembered from our childhood wrestling matches. His eyes flickered open when he felt my touch, and I saw a moment of recognition before they glazed over again. "I'm here, Bhai," I whispered, using our childhood nickname for each other. I don't know if he heard me. For the next few hours, I sat with him, occasionally wiping his forehead with a damp cloth when he seemed uncomfortable. The room smelled of incense and medicine, and outside I could hear the normal sounds of village life continuing. Children playing, a radio somewhere playing old Bollywood songs, the occasional motorcycle passing by, life going on while my cousin's was ending. He died just as the sun was setting. One moment he was breathing, and the next he wasn't. It was that simple and that devastating. My uncle checked his pulse, then nodded at me with tears in his eyes. My aunt began wailing, a sound that still echoes in my nightmares. In our tradition, we don't delay cremation. The body is to be burned within 24 hours, preferably before the next sunset. The preparations began immediately. Female relatives bathed his body while the men prepared the funeral pyre at the cremation ground about 2 kilometers from the village. When it was time to transport the body, wrapped in a simple white shroud, I was one of the 6 men chosen to carry him. As we lifted him, I noticed something wet on my right forearm. In the chaos and grief, I didn't pay much attention to it. I assumed it was water from the ritual washing or perhaps some ointment they had applied to his body. We began the solemn procession to the cremation ground, carrying Rahul on our shoulders. It was then that I first noticed the smell. At first, I thought it was just the natural odor of a body beginning to decompose in the heat. Unpleasant but expected. But this was different. This smell was wrong. It reminded me of rotting meat left in the sun for days, mixed with something chemical and bitter. It made my eyes water and my stomach churn. "Do you smell that?" I whispered to my cousin Vihan, who was carrying the body beside me. He looked at me strangely. "Just incense and marigolds," he replied. I nodded, not wanting to seem disrespectful, but the stench was getting worse with every step toward the cremation ground. By the time we reached the pyre, I was breathing through my mouth, trying not to gag. No one else seemed affected. They all moved around me with solemn purpose, arranging Rahul's body on the wooden pyre, placing sandalwood chips and ghee to help the fire burn hot. As the eldest son, my uncle performed the final rites. I stood back, watching the flames consume my cousin's body, that terrible smell somehow intensifying with the heat. I felt dizzy, almost detached from my body, as if I was floating above the scene watching myself. When it was over, and the fire had reduced Rahul to ashes, everyone began the walk back to the village for the post-cremation meal. I noticed the smear on my arm had dried to a brownish stain. Realizing it must be some bodily fluid from Rahul, maybe feces or some other discharge that had leaked during the transportation, I felt nauseated. I excused myself and went to a nearby water pump to wash it off. I scrubbed my arm thoroughly with water, using sand as an abrasive to make sure every trace was gone. The smell seemed to lessen as I cleaned myself, and I felt some relief. After paying my respects to my aunt and uncle, I decided to head home. I lived in a nearby town about 20 kilometers away, and though it was getting dark, I wanted to sleep in my own bed that night. It was around 7:30 in the evening when I started my journey home on my Royal Enfield motorcycle. The road between the village and town is usually busy, lined with small shops and food stalls that stay open late into the night. But that evening, everything felt different. The shops were shuttered, the usual fruit vendors absent from their spots. I hardly passed any vehicles, which was strange for that time of day. About 13 kilometers into my journey, the road runs parallel to a beach. It's usually a popular spot for locals in the evening, but that night it was deserted. As I was riding past, I noticed what looked like a person lying by the roadside. In the dim light, I couldn't make out much, but I assumed it was some drunk who had passed out or maybe a drug addict. Not wanting to get involved, I kept riding. That's when it hit me again. That same putrid stench from the funeral. It came so suddenly and with such intensity that I almost lost control of my bike. The smell was exactly the same, rotting meat and chemical waste, but now so strong it felt like I was drowning in it. I couldn't escape it by breathing through my mouth. I could taste it, thick and foul on my tongue. I sped up, thinking I must have passed some dead animal or garbage dump, but the smell moved with me, clinging to me like a second skin. My headlight cut through the darkness ahead, and that's when I saw it, a small black figure standing in the middle of the road. It was barely half my height, maybe the size of a 10-year-old child, but it wasn't a child. Even from a distance, I could tell that much. Its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, torso too thin. It stood completely still, facing me, though I couldn't make out any features in the darkness. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. Without thinking, I twisted the throttle, accelerating to nearly 90 kilometers per hour. I swerved around the figure, not wanting to get anywhere near it. As I passed, I felt a cold so intense it burned through my clothes and into my skin, despite the warm night air. I didn't look back. I just kept riding, heart pounding in my chest, hands slick with sweat on the handlebars. Then I heard it, a sound like bare feet slapping against pavement, rapidly gaining speed. Whatever that thing was, it was running after me, and somehow, impossibly, it was keeping pace with my motorcycle. The sound got closer and closer until it seemed right behind me. The stench became so overwhelming I thought I might pass out, my vision blurred with tears. I pushed my bike to its limit, praying to every god I could think of that I would make it home alive. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, I saw the lights of my town ahead. The running sounds faded as I reached the more populated area, and gradually the smell diminished too. By the time I turned onto my street, I was trembling so badly I could barely hold onto the handlebars. I parked my bike and stumbled into my house, locking the door behind me. My wife was visiting her parents that week, so I was alone, which right then felt like both a blessing and a curse. I didn't want her to see me in this state, but I also desperately wanted another human presence. I went straight to the bathroom to splash water on my face. As I rolled up my sleeves, I froze in horror. There, on my right forearm, was the same brownish stain I had washed away at the cremation ground. It was exactly the same size and shape, in exactly the same spot. My stomach lurched, and I vomited into the sink. I scrubbed my arm again, this time with soap, until my skin was raw and red. Then I checked every door and window in the house, making sure everything was locked. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it all, the smell, the figure on the road, the footsteps. Stress and grief can do strange things to a person's mind, but I know what I experienced was real. In the 3 weeks since that night, things have happened that I can't explain. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night to find shadows moving across my bedroom wall. Shadows that don't match any objects in the room. The stench returns without warning. While I'm at work, in the shower, eating dinner, so strong I have to stop whatever I'm doing until it passes. My dreams are filled with images of Rahul, but not as he was in life. In my dreams, his face is distorted, his eyes black and empty. He's always trying to tell me something, his mouth moving soundlessly. I wake up drenched in sweat, the sheets twisted around me like bindings. The worst part is the feeling of being watched. It follows me everywhere, at home, at work, even in crowded places. Sometimes I catch glimpses of a small, dark figure at the edge of my vision, but when I turn to look, nothing's there. I've lost weight. My wife, now back from her parents' place, says I look like a ghost myself. I haven't told her what happened. What could I say that wouldn't sound crazy? That I think some entity attached itself to me at my cousin's funeral, that whatever was on my arm, some part of Rahul's dying body, somehow connected me to something not human. I went back to the village last week, hoping to find some answers. I discreetly asked if anyone else had experienced anything strange since the funeral. My uncle mentioned that some of Rahul's personal items had been moved around in his room, though no one had gone in there. My aunt said she sometimes smells Rahul's favorite incense in the house, though none has been burned since his death. I didn't tell them about what followed me home. I couldn't bring myself to add to their grief with my supernatural problems. I don't know what to do. I've tried praying, visited temples, even consulted with a local holy man who gave me a charm to wear around my neck. Nothing helps. The stain on my arm sometimes reappears, always in the same spot, always when I'm alone. Whatever followed me that night is still here, watching, waiting. I don't know what it wants or why it chose me. All I know is that death has a stench unlike anything in this world, and once you've smelled it, part of you dies too. Story 9. I still remember that night like it was yesterday, even though it's been about 5 years now. I'm 18 now, but back when I was 12, almost 13, we lived in this renovated barn house out in the middle of nowhere in rural England. It was this really old stone building that my parents thought had character. What they called character, I called creepy as hell, especially at night. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and I had this weird setup where my bed was raised super high, like you needed a ladder to get up to it. My parents got it custom made because the room was small, and this way I could have my PlayStation and desk underneath. I used to stay up way later than I was supposed to, playing games or watching videos on my iPad with my headphones on so my parents wouldn't hear me. That night started like any other. It was a school night, probably around April or May, and I was supposed to be asleep by 10. But of course, I wasn't. I was lying in my bed, propped up on my elbows, watching some gaming videos on my iPad. The house was completely silent except for whatever was coming through my headphones. It must have been around midnight, maybe a bit after. I remember I had this weird feeling suddenly, like that feeling when you think someone's watching you. It came out of nowhere, and I paused my video, pulling my headphones off one ear to listen. The house was making its usual creaking sounds, but there was nothing unusual. Still, I couldn't shake this feeling. My bed was positioned so that when I sat up, I could see through this small window above my bedroom door. It was meant to let light into the hallway or something, one of those character features of the old barn house. From my bed, I could see if anyone walked past my room. I was still trying to convince myself I was being stupid when it happened. My window blind, the one on the actual window in my room, suddenly shot upward by itself, like it didn't slowly roll up or anything. It shot up like someone had yanked it really hard. Then just as quickly, it dropped back down with a loud snap that made me nearly jump out of my skin. I froze completely. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared at the window, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was the wind, but the window was closed. Maybe the spring mechanism was faulty, but it had never done that before. I sat there for probably a full minute, too scared to move, just watching the blind. When it didn't move again, I finally worked up the courage to scramble down the ladder from my bed. I ran straight to my parents' room, practically in tears. My dad was annoyed at first that I was still awake, but when he saw how genuinely terrified I was, he came to check my room. Of course, by then, everything was normal. The blind was just hanging there like nothing had happened. My mom suggested it was probably just the wind somehow getting in through a crack, or maybe the spring had unwound itself. My dad checked the blind mechanism and said it seemed fine. They both tried to calm me down, but I could tell they thought I was either making it up or had been half asleep and dreamed it. In the end, my dad said I could leave the light on in my room that night if it made me feel better, but I had to go back to bed because it was a school night. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there, staring at that blind, waiting for it to move again. It didn't, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in my room, watching me. The next day at school, I was exhausted, but I tried to forget about what had happened. I told myself my parents were right. It was probably just the wind or a faulty mechanism. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There had been something deliberate about the way that blind moved, like someone was trying to get my attention. That night, I made sure to go to bed on time. I didn't want to be awake late at night again, but I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Our house had these old wooden floors that always creaked when you walked on them. I figured it was one of my parents going to the bathroom. I sat up in bed to peek through that small window above my door, and what I saw makes my skin crawl even now. There was a dark figure walking past my room. Not my mom or dad. This was different. It was like a shadow, but denser somehow, and it moved in a way that didn't seem human. It was completely silent, which made no sense because those floorboards creaked if you so much as looked at them. I watched, paralyzed with fear, as this figure moved down the hallway toward the bathroom. It didn't walk into the bathroom, though. It just sort of passed through the doorway. A few minutes later, it came back out and went toward the stairs. I heard no footsteps, no creaking, nothing. I didn't tell my parents the next morning. I knew they wouldn't believe me. They'd say I was dreaming or making things up, but I knew what I'd seen. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. I started seeing that shadow figure almost every night. Sometimes it would just pass by my room once. Other times it would go back and forth like it was pacing. I started keeping track in a notebook, and it was always between midnight and 2 in the morning. But the weirdest thing, the thing that still gives me nightmares, was what I noticed about my bedroom window. One day I was walking home from the bus stop with a friend, and as we approached my house, I happened to look up at my bedroom window. There was someone standing there, looking out. I stopped dead in my tracks, and my friend asked what was wrong. When I pointed, he saw it too, a dark figure standing at my window, just watching us. I knew for a fact that no one was home. My parents were both at work, and I was the only child. We ran the rest of the way to my friend's house and called my mom, who came home right away. Of course, when she checked, there was no one in the house. After that, I started noticing it more and more. Whenever we'd drive up to the house, there would be that figure in my window. Sometimes neighbors would mention seeing someone in our upstairs window when they knew we weren't home. My parents started to get concerned, thinking we might have an actual intruder, but despite changing the locks and checking the house thoroughly, they never found anything. The activity in the house intensified too. It wasn't just the shadow in the hallway anymore. I'd hear whispering coming from empty rooms. Things would move, not dramatically like in movies, but in subtle ways. I'd leave my controller on my desk and find it on the floor in the morning. My school books would be in different places than where I left them. One night, I'll never forget this. I woke up around 1 in the morning to use the bathroom. As I was climbing down the ladder from my bed, I looked toward my door and saw a shadow figure standing right there, inside my room. It was just watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. It felt like it was studying me. After what seemed like forever, but was probably only seconds, it turned and walked through my closed door. Not opened it, walked through it. I slept in my parents' room that night. I told them I'd had a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't a dream. The next day, I refused to go back into my room alone. My mom stayed with me while I got my school things, and I could tell she was starting to worry about me. They probably thought I was developing some kind of anxiety disorder. The breaking point came about 3 months after that first incident with the blind. I was sitting at my desk under my bed, playing on my PlayStation. It was earlier than usual, around 10 at night, and my parents were still awake downstairs watching TV. I had my headphones on, completely focused on my game, when suddenly the temperature in my room dropped dramatically. It was summer, but I could see my breath in front of my face. Then my TV screen started flickering, and my controller began to vibrate in my hands, even though there was no vibration happening in the game. The lights in my room dimmed, and I heard this low humming sound that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I looked up toward my window, and the blind shot up again, just like that first night. But this time there was a face pressed against the glass. Not a human face. It was distorted, with features in all the wrong places and eyes that were completely black. It was only there for a split second before the blind snapped back down, but I saw it clearly. I screamed so loud that my parents came running upstairs. By the time they got there, everything was back to normal. The temperature, the lights, everything. But I was hysterical. I couldn't stop crying and shaking. I refused to stay in that room another night. My parents finally took me seriously. We moved out of that house within a month. They told everyone it was because my dad got a job offer closer to the city, but I knew the real reason. They'd started experiencing things too. They just didn't want to admit it to me. It's been 5 years, and I still have nightmares about that face in the window. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night with that same feeling I had back then, like something is watching me. I keep my blinds open now. I'd rather see what's out there than wonder what might be hiding behind them. I've researched that old barn house since then. Turns out it has quite a history. Several people died there over the centuries, including a whole family in the 1800s. The land it was built on has its own dark past, too. I don't know if what I experienced was ghosts or something else entirely, but I know it was real. That blind didn't move itself, and that face in my window wasn't human. I don't expect everyone to believe me. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. But I know what I saw, and no one will ever convince me it was just the wind or my imagination. Some places have darkness attached to them, and that barn house was one of them. I'm just glad we got out when we did. Story 10. I still remember every detail of that day, even though it's been 15 years. I was 12 years old, visiting my grandmother's farmhouse in rural Ohio, deep in the Appalachian Hills. My grandparents owned this massive 80-acre property, mostly dense woods with a clearing for the farmhouse and barn. We used to have these big family dinners every Sunday. My aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone would come. It was just what we did. That particular Sunday in late October started like any other. The air was crisp, leaves were all over the ground, and there was that smell that only comes in fall, like everything is slowly dying, but in a beautiful way. We'd finished dinner around 5 in the afternoon. The adults were in the kitchen, cleaning up and having coffee, while us kids were in the living room playing board games. My younger cousin Tommy, who was 9 at the time, wanted to head home early. Their house was about half a mile through the woods on the same property. There was this well-worn path that connected our grandma's place to their house. In summer and during daylight, the walk was nothing. We'd done it 1,000,000 times. But it was getting dark earlier then, and by 5:30 the sun was already setting. Tommy insisted he could walk home alone, and before anyone could stop him, he grabbed his jacket and headed out the back door. My aunt didn't even notice he'd left until about 10 minutes later. We weren't worried at first. Like I said, we all knew that path like the back of our hands. But then the back door flew open and Tommy burst in pale as a sheet and breathing so hard I thought he might pass out. He couldn't even get words out properly, just kept pointing outside and stammering. "There's something out there," he finally managed to say. "Something big and black in the woods." My uncle laughed it off. "Probably just a bear," he said, though we rarely saw bears on the property. Tommy was shaking his head frantically. "It's not a bear. It's standing up and it's watching me." The adults exchanged those looks adults give when they think a kid is making stuff up or exaggerating. My grandpa patted Tommy on the shoulder and told him to calm down. I don't know why, but I spoke up. "I'll go check it out with him." Maybe I wanted to look brave, or maybe I was just curious. Either way, I volunteered, fully expecting to find nothing but shadows and trees. Tommy didn't want to go back out, but I convinced him. "Just show me where you saw it, and we'll come right back," I promised. My grandpa nodded his approval, probably thinking this would put an end to Tommy's imagination. We grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed out. The temperature had dropped since dinner, and I remember wishing I'd grabbed a heavier jacket. Tommy was practically glued to my side as we walked down the porch steps and toward the tree line where the path began. "It was right there," Tommy whispered, pointing about 20 yards into the woods where the path curved slightly, by that big oak tree. I shined the flashlight in that direction, not expecting to see anything. That's when I saw it, and my entire body went cold. About 25 yards away, just off the path, was this thing. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and just a solid black mass. Not like a person wearing black clothes, more like a piece of darkness that had been cut out and placed in the woods. It had no real shape except that it was vaguely upright. The flashlight beam caught it directly, and I could see these small dark eyes reflecting back. They were set too close together, and they didn't blink. Below them was what looked like a nose, flat and dog-like, but there was no mouth that I could make out. No arms or legs were visible, no hair, just this black mass with eyes and a nose. The worst part was that it seemed to be vibrating or shivering slightly, not moving like it was walking or shifting weight, but like every part of it was trembling at once. That's how I knew it wasn't just a shadow or my eyes playing tricks. This thing was alive, or at least it existed in some way that wasn't normal. Tommy's hand found mine and squeezed so hard it hurt. We both stood frozen for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. "Do you see it?" Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. I couldn't even answer. My throat had closed up completely. I just nodded. Then, without any signal between us, we both turned and ran back to the house. We burst through the door, both of us talking at once, trying to explain what we'd seen. My aunt caught Tommy as he practically threw himself at her, sobbing now. "There's something out there," I kept saying. "We both saw it. It's real." My 14-year-old cousin Jake and his sister Megan, who was 13, were immediately interested. My grandpa still looked skeptical. "Probably just a bear standing up," he repeated. "They do that sometimes." "It wasn't a bear," I insisted. "It didn't have a shape like a bear. It was just black. And its eyes." Jake stood up. "I want to see," he declared. Megan nodded in agreement. I didn't want to go back out there, but I also didn't want them thinking Tommy and I were making it up. Plus, part of me thought maybe having more people would make it less scary. So the four of us went out, me clutching the flashlight with white knuckles. Tommy stayed close to Megan, and Jake took the lead. We approached the edge of the woods more slowly this time. "Where was it?" Jake asked, trying to sound brave, but his voice had an edge to it. I pointed to the spot, half expecting the thing to be gone, but it wasn't. It was in exactly the same place, not having moved an inch since we'd run away. The shivering or vibrating was still happening, and those eyes were still fixed in our direction. "Holy shit," Jake whispered, all pretense of bravery gone. "What the hell is that?" None of us answered. We all just stared at it, and it stared back at us. Then Jake did something I still can't believe. He took a step toward it, just one step forward. The thing reacted instantly. It flinched, that's the only way I can describe it, and seemed to jump slightly off the ground, not like it was hopping, but like every molecule of it just shifted upward for a split second and then back down. It was the most unnatural movement I've ever seen, like something from a glitchy video game rather than a living creature. That was enough for all of us. We turned and ran back to the house again, this time all four of us yelling and talking over each other, trying to make the adults understand what we'd seen. My grandpa was getting annoyed now. "That's enough," he said firmly. "You kids are working yourselves up over nothing. There are no monsters in those woods." "Grandpa, please," I begged. "Just come look. Please." But he wouldn't. None of the adults would. They all thought we were playing some kind of elaborate prank, or that we'd scared ourselves with stories and were seeing things. We kept insisting, but they kept dismissing us. My aunt eventually took Tommy home in their car, driving around the long way on the road instead of taking the path. Jake, Megan, and I sat in the living room, constantly looking out the windows, afraid the thing might come closer to the house. It wasn't until almost an hour later that my grandpa finally got tired of our persistent fear and agreed to go look. "I'll show you there's nothing to be afraid of," he said, grabbing his coat and a more powerful flashlight. I didn't want to go back out, but I also didn't want to stay in the house alone, so all three of us kids followed him at a distance. When we reached the spot where we'd seen the thing, there was nothing there, just empty woods and fallen leaves. "See?" my grandpa said, sweeping the flashlight beam around. "Nothing here but trees and shadows." But I knew what I'd seen. We all did. That thing had been there, watching us, and now it was gone. Somehow that was even more terrifying than if it had still been there. For the rest of the evening, none of us kids would go outside alone. We stuck together, jumping at every sound from outside. The adults thought we were being ridiculous, but they didn't understand. They hadn't seen those eyes or that unnatural movement. I've been back to my grandmother's property hundreds of times since then. I know exactly where we saw that thing. There's a small tree stump near that spot now, the oak having been cut down a few years back. Every time I pass that spot, I get the same cold feeling up my spine. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was a bear standing oddly in the shadows. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion caused by the failing light and the flashlight beam. But deep down, I know better. Whatever we saw that day wasn't any animal I've ever seen before or since. It wasn't a person in a costume or a shadow playing tricks. It was something else, something that didn't belong in our world, but was there anyway, watching us from the edge of the woods like it was standing at the threshold between worlds. The worst part is that I still don't know what it wanted or why it was there. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, somewhere in those woods waiting. The primal fear I felt that day wasn't the kind you get from watching a scary movie or hearing a strange noise at night. It was the kind of fear that's buried deep in our DNA, the kind that tells you when something is fundamentally wrong with the world around you. I'm 27 now, and I've never told this story to anyone outside my family. My cousins and I still talk about it sometimes, when the adults aren't around. Jake swears he saw it again once, years later, but further into the woods. Tommy refuses to walk that path alone, even in broad daylight. As for me, I can't explain what we saw that day, but I know it was real. And sometimes, when I'm at my grandmother's house and look out toward those woods at dusk, I could swear I see something shivering between the trees, watching with those small dark eyes. Story 11. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts, cryptids, or anything supernatural. I was always the rational kid in my friend group, the one who would debunk urban legends and roll my eyes at scary stories. But something happened to me 5 years ago when I was 14 that I still can't explain, and I finally worked up the courage to write it down. My dad and I never really had the best relationship. He worked long hours as a mechanic, and after my mom left when I was 10, it was just us two trying to figure things out. That summer before high school, he suddenly announced we were going on a road trip from our home in Arizona to visit his cousin in West Virginia. I think it was his attempt at bonding, but I was just annoyed about missing my plans with friends. We were 3 days into the trip when we entered Kentucky. I remember because Dad kept pointing out how different everything looked from the desert landscape I'd grown up with. "Look at all that green, Miguel," he kept saying, like I'd never seen trees before. The whole day had been tense. We'd gotten lost twice because Dad refused to use GPS, insisting his paper map was better. By evening, we were somewhere in rural Kentucky, hours behind schedule. Around 8 or 9 that night, we pulled into this tiny gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds, and the whole place smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes. An old man with leathery skin sat behind the counter watching a tiny TV with terrible reception. Dad filled up the car while I went inside to get some snacks. I grabbed some chips, candy, and a couple of sodas. When I approached the counter, the old man barely looked at me, just mumbled something about not being from around here. I nodded awkwardly and waited for him to ring me up. As he handed me my change, he said something that still gives me chills when I think about it. "Y'all best find a place to stay before dark. Ain't safe out there at night." I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to scare the out-of-town kid. When I told my dad what the guy said, he brushed it off too. People in small towns always think their back roads are dangerous. It's probably just deer or something. The problem was, we couldn't find any motels nearby. Dad was exhausted from driving all day, and I could tell he was getting frustrated as we drove another 20 miles without seeing any place to stay. Eventually, we came across a highway rest area with a small parking lot. There were a couple of semis parked there, and Dad decided we'd just sleep in the car for the night and continue early in the morning. "We've got the seats that recline, blankets in the back. It'll be fine for one night," he insisted, though I could tell he was disappointed in himself for not planning better. I tried to get comfortable in the passenger seat, but it was impossible. Dad fell asleep almost immediately, his soft snoring filling the car, but I couldn't relax. The air in the car felt stifling, and even with the windows cracked, I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. My phone showed it was just after 11, and I had no signal to even distract myself with games or texting. After about 30 minutes of tossing and turning, I decided to get some fresh air. I carefully opened my door, trying not to wake Dad, and stepped outside. The night was surprisingly cold for summer, and I zipped up my hoodie as I walked a few feet from the car. The rest area was eerily quiet. The parking lot had those yellow-orange lights that cast everything in a sickly glow. Beyond the lot was a stretch of road, and across it, something I'd never seen in real life before, a massive cornfield. Growing up in Arizona, cornfields weren't exactly common, and I found myself staring at it, fascinated by how the stalks swayed slightly in the breeze. I don't know what possessed me to cross the road. Maybe it was teenage boredom, or just wanting to see something new up close. I looked back at our car. Dad was still asleep, and I figured I'd just be gone for a few minutes. No big deal. As I approached the edge of the cornfield, I felt a weird sensation, like I was being watched. I brushed it off as just being nervous about being alone in the dark in an unfamiliar place. The corn was much taller than I'd expected, probably 7 or 8 feet high. I touched one of the leaves, surprised by how rough it felt. That's when I noticed something beyond the cornfield. A large white barn with colored stripes painted along the side. It was maybe a quarter mile away, standing alone in what looked like an empty field. No house nearby, no other buildings, just this barn in the middle of nowhere. Even in the dark, I could make out its shape against the night sky. Something about it felt off, like it didn't belong there, but my curiosity got the better of me. I started walking along the edge of the cornfield, not wanting to go into it and get lost, but making my way toward the barn. With each step, that feeling of being watched intensified. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was nothing there except the swaying corn. As I got closer to the barn, I could see more details. The colored stripes were actually symbols, not letters or numbers, but weird shapes I'd never seen before. They seemed to shimmer slightly, though there was no light hitting them that I could see. The barn doors were closed, but there was a faint glow coming from inside, visible through the cracks in the wood. I was about 50 yards away when I saw it, something peering around the corner of the barn. At first I thought it was a bell or some kind of farm equipment attached to the side of the structure, but then it moved. It was ahead, just ahead, poking out from behind the barn, looking directly at me. I froze. Every instinct told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Whatever it was tall, way too tall. The barn was standard height, maybe 15 feet to the roof, and this thing's head was at least 7 or 8 feet off the ground. But it wasn't just the height that terrified me, it was the shape. The head was elongated, almost oval, but with odd angles that didn't make sense for any animal I knew. It had no hair that I could see, just smooth, pale skin that reflected the moonlight in a way that made it look almost wet. I couldn't make out facial features clearly from that distance in the dark, but I could tell it was watching me, not like an animal watches with curiosity or fear. It was studying me, calculating something. I had the overwhelming sense that it was deciding what to do with me. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, me frozen in fear, it watching from the barn. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket with a notification sound, probably picking up a random signal, and the spell broke. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, back along the edge of the cornfield, across the road, and to our car. I didn't look back once. I fumbled with the door handle, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it, and finally collapsed into the passenger seat, gasping for air. My dad didn't even wake up. He just shifted in his sleep, completely unaware that his son was having a complete meltdown next to him. I locked the doors, pulled my blanket up to my chin, and stared out the window toward the cornfield, terrified I'd see that thing following me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept watching, waiting, but nothing ever came. When dawn finally broke, I was still wide awake, exhausted and jittery. Dad woke up, complained about his stiff neck, and asked if I'd slept okay. I lied and said yes. As we drove away, I looked back at the cornfield. In the daylight, I could see that there was no barn beyond it, just more fields stretching to the horizon. I've spent 5 years trying to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe I dozed off and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe it was just a farmer or some local messing with the out-of-town kid. Maybe my eyes played tricks on me in the dark, but deep down, I know what I saw was real. I was completely sober, alert, and conscious, and whatever was watching me from that barn wasn't human. I've never told anyone this story before today. My dad and I never talk about that trip. It didn't magically fix our relationship like he'd hoped. We're a little better now, but I've never brought up what happened that night in Kentucky. The thing that disturbs me most isn't just what I saw. It's the certainty I felt in that moment that it was aware of me in a way that went beyond normal consciousness. It wasn't just looking at me, it was perceiving me on a level I don't understand. I don't travel through rural areas anymore if I can help it. I'm in college now, and my friends think I'm weird for always wanting to stay in cities, for refusing to go camping or on road trips through the countryside. They joke that I'm a city boy who's afraid of nature. But it's not nature I'm afraid of. It's what hides in those empty spaces, in the places where people don't go, in the dark corners of rural America. Because now I know there are things out there, watching and waiting, that most people will never see. And sometimes I wonder if it's still there, behind that barn that only exists at night, waiting for the next curious person to wander too far from safety. Story 12. I've never told anyone outside my family about this, and even they don't fully understand what happened to me that night when I was 10 years old. It's been almost 15 years, but I can still remember every detail like it happened yesterday. I've spent hours researching what might explain it, but nothing completely fits. Maybe writing it out will help me make sense of it. This happened in our old apartment, a small two-bedroom place where I shared a room with my older sister. My grandma was visiting from out of state that weekend, so she took our bedroom, and my parents set up a makeshift bed for me and my sister in the living room. Just some blankets on the carpet with our pillows. My sister fell asleep right away, but I couldn't. I've always been the restless one. I remember staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours, watching the shadows from the streetlight outside make patterns through the blinds. The apartment was quiet except for my sister's breathing and the occasional car passing by. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I remember waking up suddenly. That's when everything changed. I opened my eyes and immediately knew something was wrong. The room felt different. Not in any way I could explain at first, but every cell in my body was screaming that something wasn't right. I was completely frozen, not because I couldn't move, but because I was terrified to. I had this overwhelming feeling that someone, or something, was watching me, not just casually glancing, but intensely observing every breath I took. I remember trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Our apartment was small. If someone had broken in, we would have heard them. The front door had those annoying squeaky hinges that made noise even when you tried to open it slowly. The windows all had screens that scraped against the frame. But this feeling, it wasn't like hearing a noise and getting scared. It felt like when you know someone's staring at you even with your back turned. I tried to calm down by focusing on my breathing, but that's when I noticed how hyper-aware I was becoming of my own body. I could feel every single place the blanket touched my skin, not just as a general sensation, but as if each individual fiber was pressing against me. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead, not just the wetness, but the actual beads forming and slowly rolling down. I became aware of each hair on my head, like I could count them all individually if I wanted to. Then the goosebumps started. I felt each one rise on my arms, one by one, like tiny mountains pushing up from beneath my skin. The air in the room seemed to press against me, and I could feel it moving in and out of my lungs with each breath. My heart wasn't just beating fast. I could feel the blood pumping through individual veins. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. Not loud at first, but persistent, like the whine of an old TV turned on with no signal. It grew louder until it seemed to fill the entire room. But the worst part, the part that still makes me question what really happened, was what happened to my vision. The furniture in our living room began to change size. The coffee table that was maybe 3 feet away suddenly looked massive, like it had grown to the size of a car. The TV stand loomed impossibly tall, like a skyscraper. Everything large seemed gigantic, out of proportion, threatening. Then my perspective would suddenly shift, and small things became microscopic. I looked at my own fingers poking out from under the blanket, and they seemed miles away, tiny and unreachable. The pattern on the blanket became an endless landscape of threads that I could get lost in. The room seemed to pulse, zooming in and out in a nauseating rhythm that had nothing to do with my actual vision. 1 second, the ceiling would be miles high, and the next, it would be pressing down just inches from my face. The walls expanded and contracted like they were breathing. I wanted to scream. I needed to wake up my sister, who was sleeping just a few feet away. I could see her from the corner of my eye, her shape under the blanket rising and falling with her breathing, but she looked both impossibly far and uncomfortably close at the same time. I tried to call out, but my voice was stuck somewhere deep inside me. My mouth wouldn't open. My lungs felt full of concrete. The worst part was that I wasn't paralyzed, not completely. I could wiggle my toes and fingers, but the thought of moving any more than that filled me with absolute terror. Something told me that if I moved, whatever was watching me would. I don't know. Do something. Take me. Hurt me. I was convinced that the only thing keeping me safe was staying perfectly still and pretending to be asleep. Time stopped making sense. What felt like hours might have been minutes. The digital clock on the VCR kept changing, but the numbers looked wrong. Too big, then too small, sometimes stretching into unrecognizable shapes. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just a general sense anymore. It felt like whatever was watching me was now right next to the makeshift bed. I couldn't see anything unusual in the room, but I knew something was there, not just nearby, but hovering over me, studying me. I remember thinking that if I turned my head just slightly, I might see it, but I was too terrified to try. The air got heavier, like it was becoming solid. Breathing became difficult. The ringing in my ears turned into a pulsing that matched the distortion of the room. Everything was synchronized in this terrifying rhythm. The zooming of my vision, the pulsing of the room, the ringing in my ears, and whatever presence was watching me. I tried to focus on my sister again, hoping that somehow she would wake up and save me from whatever was happening. But looking at her made the distortion worse. One second she seemed tiny, like a doll under a blanket, and the next she looked enormous, her shoulder the size of a hill. I remember tears rolling down my face, but even that sensation was distorted. Each tear felt like a flood washing over my skin. I silently begged for it to stop, for morning to come, for someone to check on us. The worst moment came when I felt something, I can only describe it as a pressure, move across the room toward me. Not footsteps, not a sound, just a shifting in the air like something displacing it as it moved. It started from the corner near the TV and slowly, deliberately moved toward where I was lying. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it approaching, inch by inch. When it reached the edge of my makeshift bed, the distortions in my vision went crazy. The room spun and warped. The ceiling seemed to swirl like water going down a drain. The pressure continued moving until it was right above me, hovering there. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to bear the visual distortions anymore, but that just made the other sensations more intense. With my eyes closed, I became certain that if I opened them again, I would see whatever was watching me. I knew with absolute certainty that it was inches from my face now. The air around my head felt cold, like something was pulling the warmth away. I don't know how long I stayed like that, eyes shut tight, barely breathing, every nerve ending screaming with awareness. Eventually, I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion and terror. When I woke up the next morning, everything was normal. The sun was streaming through the blinds. My sister was still asleep beside me, and the room was just our ordinary living room. No distortions, no presence, no ringing in my ears. Just the familiar sounds of my mom in the kitchen making breakfast. I tried to tell my parents what happened, but I didn't have the words to explain it properly. They said it was just a nightmare, but I know the difference between dreams and reality. This wasn't a dream. I was awake the entire time. Years later, I started researching what might explain what I experienced. I came across sleep paralysis, which explains the feeling of being watched and the inability to move or call out. I also found something called Alice in Wonderland syndrome, a neurological condition where your perception of size and distance becomes distorted. Between these two conditions, I can almost explain what happened to me that night. Almost. What I can't explain is the absolute certainty I had that something was in that room with me, something that was studying me, observing me like I was some kind of specimen, something that moved deliberately through our living room and hovered over me. To this day, I hate sleeping anywhere but my own bedroom with the door locked. I always sleep with a small light on, and sometimes, just as I'm drifting off, I'll feel the beginnings of that hyper-awareness again. The slight ringing in my ears, the feeling of each hair on my scalp, the sensation that the room is starting to shift and distort. When that happens, I turn on all the lights and stay awake until morning, because whatever was in our living room that night, I'm terrified it might come back for me. Story 13. I've been hesitating to write this for months now. Honestly, I'm not even sure if posting it here will help. but I need to tell someone who might understand, or at least not think I'm completely insane. This happened last summer when my girlfriend Anna and I were staying at my grandmother's house in Pinewood Heights. We were there for about a week to help clean out some old stuff since my grandma was thinking about selling the place. It's this old two-story house with a finished basement that my grandfather converted into a guest room back in the 90s. For context, I've always been the rational type. I'm an atheist, I believe in science, and I've never bought into ghost stories or supernatural stuff. I mean, I enjoy horror movies like anyone else, but I've always rolled my eyes at people who claim to have experienced something. That's important to understand because what happened that night completely shattered my worldview. It was our third night staying there. The upstairs bedrooms were being painted, so Anna and I were sleeping in the basement. It wasn't creepy or anything, just a normal finished basement with wood paneling, a pull-out couch, and a small bathroom. My grandma had put fresh sheets on the pull-out, and we even had a little TV down there. We'd spent the day sorting through boxes in the attic, and we were exhausted. Anna fell asleep almost immediately, but I was having trouble drifting off. It was around 1 a.m, and I was just lying there in the dark, listening to Anna's steady breathing beside me. That's when it started. I suddenly felt this wave of relaxation wash over me. Not like normal tiredness, but this intense, almost drug-like calm that seemed to seep into every muscle in my body. I wasn't alarmed at first. I actually thought, great, I'm finally falling asleep. But then I noticed this low-frequency humming in my left ear. It wasn't loud, but it was definitely there, this consistent rhythmic hum that seemed to pulse. At almost the same moment, I realized there was a different sound in my right ear, a slower, deeper ringing. The two sounds weren't synchronized, which made it impossible to tune them out. I remember thinking it was weird, but assumed it was just some quirk of being overtired. I still had my eyes open, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. The humming in my left ear started getting louder and more intense, and instead of being annoying, it somehow made me feel even more relaxed. It was like the sound was physically pushing me deeper into this weird, calm state. And then things got truly bizarre. Even though I was staring straight at the dark ceiling, I started seeing other rooms, not like a dream or even like I was physically there. It's hard to explain. It was like pale, faint silhouettes of rooms appeared in the center of my vision. They were fuzzy around the edges, but clear enough that I could tell they were different parts of my grandmother's house. First, I saw the kitchen, the old yellow cabinets, the fruit bowl on the counter. Then it flashed to the living room with its floral couch and my grandpa's old recliner. Then the dining room. Each image lasted maybe 2 or 3 seconds before being replaced by another. The bathroom, the hallway. Rooms upstairs I hadn't even been in yet during this visit. I wasn't moving my head or eyes. These images were just appearing like someone was flipping through channels on a TV inside my mind. I could still see the darkness of the basement ceiling around these images, like they were windows into other parts of the house. The whole time, the humming in my ears continued, getting more intense, and that's when everything changed. The peaceful feeling vanished in an instant. It was replaced by the most acute terror I've ever felt in my life. Not a gradual buildup of fear. It hit me like a train. 1 second I was floating in this weird euphoria, and the next I was in absolute panic. My entire body seized up, not like sleep paralysis, which I've had before. This was different. It felt like every single muscle had been locked in place. I couldn't even blink. I was completely immobile but fully conscious. And then came the sensation that I still have nightmares about. It felt like my brain was being physically compressed inside my skull, like someone had reached inside my head and was squeezing my brain from all sides. The pain was excruciating, not sharp like a headache, but this overwhelming pressure that made me feel like my consciousness was being crushed into a tiny point. The room images started flashing faster now, but they were distorted, like they were being viewed through rippling water. Kitchen, living room, attic, basement, rooms I didn't recognize, angles that weren't possible. coming and going so quickly I could barely process them. I tried to scream, to move, to wake Anna, but I couldn't do anything. I was trapped in my own body, experiencing this invasion, because that's what it felt like something had gotten into my head and was rifling through it, squeezing it, examining it. The worst part was that I was fully aware the entire time. This wasn't sleep paralysis or a nightmare. I could still see the actual basement around the edges of these hallucinations. I could still feel Anna's warmth beside me. I could hear her breathing, but I couldn't reach her. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Eventually, the room vision stopped flashing, and the squeezing sensation in my brain eased slightly, but I was still completely paralyzed. I focused everything I had on trying to move just one finger. I remember thinking that if I could just move a single part of my body, I could break free from whatever this was. I concentrated on my right index finger, trying with every ounce of willpower to make it twitch. When it finally moved, it was like a dam breaking. Suddenly I could move my hand, then my arm, and then I was sitting bolt upright, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. My entire body started trembling violently, not shivering like when you're cold, but these deep, uncontrollable tremors that shook me to my core. My teeth were chattering so hard I thought they might break, and I couldn't stop it. Anna woke up immediately. She sat up and turned on the lamp, asking what was wrong. I couldn't even form words at first. When I finally could speak, I didn't try to explain. I just said, "We need to go upstairs, now, please." She looked confused and concerned, but didn't argue. We grabbed our pillows and went up to the living room, where we spent the rest of the night on the couch. I told her I thought I'd had a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't a dream. Not even close. I've had sleep paralysis before. I know what that feels like, the heaviness, the inability to move, sometimes seeing shadow figures. This was completely different. Sleep paralysis doesn't come with that brain-squishing sensation or the room visions. It doesn't start with euphoria before plunging you into terror. The next morning I felt drained, like I had the worst hangover of my life. The trembling had stopped, but I had this lingering headache and sense of dread that followed me around. Anna kept asking if I was okay, and I kept saying I was fine, just tired. We stayed at my grandma's for 3 more days, but I refused to sleep in the basement again. I made up an excuse about the pull-out hurting my back. I didn't tell Anna or my grandmother what happened. How could I? It sounded insane even to me. It's been 7 months now and I still don't have an explanation. I've researched everything from temporal lobe epilepsy to carbon monoxide poisoning to obscure psychological conditions. Nothing matches what I experienced. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just some weird neurological hiccup, my brain misfiring in a specific way that created that particular set of sensations. But deep down, I don't believe that. It felt intentional, like something was examining me, using me to look through the house, testing what it could do with my mind. I haven't been back to my grandmother's house since. She ended up not selling it after all, and she's invited us for Christmas, but I've made excuses. I can't go back there. I can't risk experiencing that again. The thing that scares me most is that whatever happened didn't feel random. It felt like the beginning of something, like a first contact. I can't shake the feeling that it might happen again, that whatever reached into my brain that night might come back to finish what it started. I still get the tremors sometimes, usually when I'm falling asleep, just a few seconds of uncontrollable shaking before they stop. And occasionally, just as I'm drifting off, I'll hear that faint humming in my left ear starting up again. When that happens, I force myself awake immediately, no matter how tired I am. I don't expect anyone to have answers. I know how this sounds. If someone had told me this story a year ago, I'd have thought they were exaggerating or making it up entirely. But I know what I experienced. It was real. It happened. And I still can't explain what invaded my consciousness that night in my grandmother's basement. Story 14. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened when I stayed at my great-aunt's house last summer. I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. Writing this down feels important somehow, even if no one believes me. I'm Emma, and I was 17 when my mom volunteered me to stay with Great Aunt Meredith after her hip surgery. It wasn't really a big deal. I'd visited her place in Oak Ridge plenty of times before, though I'd never spent the night there alone with her. Mom said it would just be for one night until my cousin could take over the next day. The house itself is this massive Victorian thing built sometime in the 1800s. It sits on this weird stretch of land between two churches, St. Mark's, this quaint little white chapel that always gave me peaceful vibes, and then across the other side, Grace Baptist, which honestly gave me the creeps even in broad daylight. I can't explain why. It just felt wrong somehow. I've always been what my mom calls sensitive. I pick up on energies and vibes that other people don't seem to notice. When I was little, I used to see shadows moving in our hallway at night. My parents chalked it up to an overactive imagination, but I knew better. As I got older, I learned to shut it out most of the time, but certain places still get to me. Great Aunt Meredith's house was definitely one of those places. When I arrived that afternoon, the sun was already starting to set. Mom dropped me off with an overnight bag and Aunt Meredith's medication schedule. The medication made her drowsy, so Mom said she'd probably sleep most of the time I was there. All I needed to do was help her to the bathroom, make sure she took her pills, and fix us some dinner. "Just stay on the main floor with her," Mom said before leaving. "No need to go wandering around upstairs. Place is full of dust and old junk anyway." I nodded, but something in her tone made me think there was more to it. Mom knew about my sensitivity, even if she pretended not to believe in it. After she left, I helped Aunt Meredith take her evening medication and got her settled in her bedroom, which thankfully was on the main floor. She told me about the house while I made us some soup for dinner. "This place used to be a hotel, you know," she said, her voice raspy with age. "That was before they turned it into a hospital during the Civil War." I nearly dropped the ladle I was holding. "A hospital? You never mentioned that before." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it was just for a little while. Not enough proper hospitals back then. After the war, it went back to being a regular house. Your great-uncle Harold's family bought it in 1922. I brought her the soup, and she ate a little before the medication kicked in and made her drowsy. By 7 o'clock, she was fast asleep, and I was alone in this massive old house with nothing to do. The main floor felt okay, a little stuffy and old-fashioned, but not scary. I spent an hour or so scrolling through my phone until the battery got low. I'd forgotten my charger, and Aunt Meredith's ancient outlets weren't compatible with my phone anyway. As the night got darker, the house seemed to get quieter and somehow more awake at the same time. I could hear the floorboards creaking overhead, and every now and then there'd be a thump or a sliding sound that I couldn't explain. Just the house settling, I told myself, even though it had been settling for over 100 years. I tried to watch TV, but the reception was terrible, and Aunt Meredith only had basic cable anyway. By 9 o'clock, I was bored out of my mind and, against my better judgment, decided to explore a little. The staircase to the second floor was this grand, sweeping thing with ornate wooden banisters. As soon as my foot hit the first step, I felt it, that shift in energy that I've felt in other places before. It wasn't necessarily bad, just different, heavier, like the air itself was thicker up there. I continued up anyway, running my hand along the smooth wood of the banister. When I reached the top, I was faced with a long hallway with doors on either side. Probably the old hotel rooms, I realized. The wallpaper was faded floral print, peeling in places to reveal older patterns beneath. The first few rooms I peeked into were just storage. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old furniture covered with sheets, that sort of thing. Nothing interesting. But when I got to the room at the end of the hall, I felt a chill run down my spine before I even opened the door. This room was different. It had been set up like some kind of memorial to the original owners. There was a 4-poster bed with an antique quilt, a vanity with an old-fashioned hairbrush and mirror, and on the wall, a large framed photograph. I stepped closer to look at it and immediately wished I hadn't. It showed a family of 4, a stern-looking man with a thick beard, a woman in a high-necked dress, and 2 children who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. They were dressed in typical 1800s clothing, not smiling, Nobody smiled in old photos, but there was something off about their eyes. They seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. I know how that sounds, like something from a cheesy horror movie, but I swear it felt like they were watching me. Not just the flat stare of a photograph, but actually tracking my movements. The longer I looked, the more uncomfortable I felt, like there was something dark clinging to the image itself. I backed away, bumping into the bedpost. That's when I noticed the temperature in the room had dropped significantly. I could see my breath coming out in little puffs of vapor, even though it was summer and the rest of the house was warm. "Hello?" I said, immediately feeling stupid. What was I expecting? For the photograph to answer me? But something did respond, not with words, but with a sound, a soft scratching noise coming from inside the wall behind the photograph. I told myself it was just mice. Old houses have mice, right? But then the scratching got louder, more deliberate, like someone dragging their nails across the inside of the plaster. I should have left right then. Any sensible person would have. But something compelled me to step closer to the photograph again, to really look at the family captured there. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In the background of the image, barely visible in the shadowy corner of whatever room they'd been photographed in, was a fifth figure. It was blurry, indistinct, maybe just a smudge on the photograph or a trick of the light, but it looked like a person standing behind them, taller than the others, with its face obscured. The scratching sound stopped abruptly, replaced by complete silence. Not the normal silence of an empty house, but a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. Then I smelled it. A sharp, antiseptic smell mixed with something metallic. It reminded me of the time I'd cut my hand badly and had to go to the emergency room. The smell of disinfectant and blood. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on the photograph. The faces seemed to be changing subtly, the man's stern expression morphing into something more sinister, the woman's blank stare becoming pleading. I reached for the doorknob behind me without turning around, but when my fingers closed around it, it wouldn't turn, the door wouldn't open. That's when the whispering started. It wasn't coming from any specific direction. It seemed to fill the room, multiple voices overlapping each other, too quiet to make out individual words but clearly human. Some sounded pained, others angry, a few seemed to be crying. The antiseptic smell grew stronger, and now I could definitely smell blood. My eyes darted around the room, looking for its source, and landed on the bed. The white quilt was developing dark red stains that spread slowly across the fabric, blooming like horrible flowers. I pulled harder on the doorknob, jiggling it frantically. "Help!" I shouted, hoping Aunt Meredith might somehow hear me from downstairs. "Please, someone help!" The whispering grew louder, and now I could make out some words. Help, pain, doctor, please. Civil War soldiers, I thought wildly. This was a hospital. They died here. Just as panic was about to completely overtake me, the door suddenly gave way, nearly causing me to fall backward into the hallway. I didn't hesitate. I ran, slamming the door behind me and racing toward the stairs, but the hallway seemed longer than before, stretching out impossibly in front of me. The doors on either side began to open and close on their own, each one revealing a brief glimpse of figures inside, shadowy shapes in period clothing, some in what looked like bloodied Union uniforms, others in civilian clothes from another century. I finally reached the stairs and practically threw myself down them, gripping the banister to keep from falling. When I reached the main floor, I ran straight to Aunt Meredith's room, flinging open the door without knocking. She was still asleep, breathing peacefully, completely unaware of what was happening upstairs. I stood there panting, trying to decide whether to wake her or not. What would I even say? "Your house is haunted by Civil War ghosts?" As I stood there, I gradually became aware that the oppressive feeling had lifted. The air felt normal again. The house was quiet, just regular old house noises, not supernatural whispering. I closed Aunt Meredith's door quietly and went to sit in the living room, turning on all the lights. There was no way I was going back upstairs, and I definitely wasn't sleeping. I stayed awake all night, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but relieved. My cousin showed up around 9 to take over, and I practically ran to my mom's car when she came to pick me up. "How was it?" she asked as we drove away. "Boring, I bet." I just nodded, not knowing what to say. How do you tell someone about something like that without sounding crazy? A week later, I worked up the courage to ask my mom about the history of Aunt Meredith's house. She confirmed it had indeed been used as a makeshift hospital during the Civil War. "There's a reason your aunt never goes upstairs anymore," she said quietly. "Not since your Uncle Harold died. He was the one who insisted on keeping that room intact, the one with the original owner's photograph." My blood ran cold. Did something happen to him there? Mom hesitated before answering. "They found him in that room. Heart attack, the doctor said. But he had the strangest expression on his face. And Aunt Meredith always said the strangest thing, that when they found him, he was staring at that old photograph and his fingernails were broken, like he'd been scratching at something." I've never been back to that house. Aunt Meredith moved to a nursing home 3 months later, and the house was sold to some historical preservation society. Sometimes I wonder if the new owners have experienced anything in that upstairs room, if they've noticed the eyes in that photograph following them, or heard the whispers of long-dead soldiers still searching for help that will never come. I still have nightmares about those faces in the photograph. Sometimes, in the dreams, I'm in the picture too, standing next to that indistinct fifth figure in the background, both of us watching the living with hollow, hungry eyes. Story 15. I've never actually shared this with anyone outside my immediate family. It's been 17 years, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I'm 25 now, but when I was 8, something happened at my grandmother's house in Connecticut that I just can't explain, no matter how much I try to rationalize it. My grandmother lived in this old Victorian house in a pretty normal suburban neighborhood. It was just a few blocks from the town green, you know, one of those classic New England setups with park benches and a gazebo where they'd do summer concerts. Her house always gave me this weird feeling, though. Not necessarily bad, just different, like the air was heavier inside or something. That particular day was completely normal, sunny, warm, middle of summer vacation. My parents had dropped me and my little brother off at Grandma's while they went to some furniture store in the next town over. My brother was only 5 then and was taking a nap inside with Grandma, who'd fallen asleep watching some soap opera in the living room. I was bored out of my mind and went to play in the front yard. It was one of those yards with those decorative rock gardens and these creepy garden gnomes my grandma collected. I was just throwing a tennis ball against the side of the house, counting how many times I could catch it without dropping it. I remember I had just hit 26 catches. I was keeping count because I wanted to beat my record, when I felt this presence. You know when you can just feel someone watching you? It was like that, but way more intense. The hair on my arms stood up before I even turned around. When I did turn, I froze completely. There, at the edge of the yard near the driveway, was this wolf. But not just any wolf. This thing was huge, like the size of a small horse almost. Its fur was this deep matte black that seemed to absorb the sunlight around it. But the worst part, the part that still shows up in my nightmares sometimes, were its eyes. They were glowing red. Not reddish-brown like some animals have, but actual glowing red, like 2 little flashlights. It wasn't growling or showing teeth or anything aggressive. It was just standing there, staring right at me, not moving a muscle. The tennis ball I'd been throwing hit the ground beside me and bounced away, but I couldn't even look at it. I couldn't look away from those eyes. I don't know how long we stared at each other, probably only a few seconds, but it felt like forever. Then my fight or flight kicked in, and I ran. I bolted straight for the front door, practically falling over myself. I remember my hands were shaking so bad I could barely grab the door handle. I slammed the door behind me and pressed my back against it, breathing like I'd just run a marathon. My grandma was still asleep on the couch, and my brother was curled up in the armchair with his blanket. The TV was still playing some stupid commercial with people way too excited about paper towels. Here's the weird part. After about 15 seconds of standing there terrified, I started wondering if I'd imagined it. I mean, a giant black wolf with glowing red eyes in suburban Connecticut in the middle of the day, with people mowing lawns just a couple houses down. It didn't make sense. So I did what any curious and probably stupid kid would do. I looked out the window. Nothing there. I slowly opened the front door and peeked out. The yard was completely empty. No wolf, no paw prints, nothing. Now my grandma's yard was fully fenced in. One of those white picket fences in the front and taller privacy fences along the sides and back. The gate to the driveway was closed. There was absolutely nowhere this massive animal could have gone in 15 seconds without someone seeing it. Our next-door neighbor was outside watering her flowers, and she didn't seem concerned at all. I went back outside cautiously and looked everywhere, behind the bushes, around the side of the house, even under the porch. Nothing. It had completely vanished. I asked the neighbor if she'd seen a dog or anything, and she looked at me like I was crazy. Said she'd been outside for almost an hour and hadn't seen anything bigger than a squirrel. I tried to tell my grandma about it when she woke up, but she just patted my head and said I had an active imagination. My parents said the same thing when they picked us up later. But here's where it gets even weirder. My grandma's house had always been strange. She had this room upstairs that she called her chapel. It had these old stained glass windows that didn't match the rest of the house, like they'd been salvaged from somewhere else. The room always smelled like herbs and candles, and she had these old books with symbols on them that I couldn't read. I later found out from overhearing my parents that Grandma practiced what they called the old ways. They never said it directly to us kids, but they were talking about witchcraft or some kind of black magic. My mom always seemed uncomfortable about it, but she respected her mother's traditions, as she called them. About 2 months after the wolf incident, my brother and I were staying over at Grandma's house again. We were heading upstairs to grab some toys from the guest room where we slept. I was leading the way, and my brother was right behind me. We were about halfway up the stairs when we both stopped dead in our tracks. At the top of the landing stood what I can only describe as the Grim Reaper. I'm not exaggerating or trying to be dramatic. That's exactly what it looked like. A tall, dark figure in what looked like a black cloak or robe. I couldn't see a face inside the hood, just darkness. It moved from the right side of the hallway, stopped at the top of the stairs, and seemed to look down at us. Then it just turned and went into my grandma's bedroom on the left. The scariest part, my brother saw it too. I know this because he grabbed my shirt so hard he almost tore it, and we both started screaming at the exact same time. We flew down those stairs faster than I thought humanly possible. We were crying and babbling when we found Grandma in the kitchen. She came upstairs with us, checked every room, and found nothing. She said old houses make shadows that play tricks on your eyes. But how do shadows move on their own? And how do two people see the exact same shadow at the exact same time? After that day, I never wanted to go back to Grandma's house, but of course we had to for holidays and stuff. I never saw the wolf or the cloaked figure again, but I always felt watched in that house, especially in the hallway upstairs or in the front yard. Grandma died when I was 15. The family sold the house pretty quickly after that. I remember helping my parents clean out her things and finding all sorts of weird stuff in that chapel room. Jars of dried plants I couldn't identify, strange symbols drawn on pieces of paper, old books in languages I didn't recognize. My parents threw most of it away or donated it. One thing they did keep was this small wooden box with carvings on it. Inside were some old photographs and a leather-bound journal of my grandma's. I snuck a look at it once, but most of it was in some language I couldn't read. The parts in English mentioned guardians and watchers and had drawings that gave me the creeps. My parents keep that box in their attic now. Sometimes I think about going through it more thoroughly, but something always holds me back. Like maybe there are some things I'm better off not knowing. To this day, I've tried to find logical explanations for what I saw. Could the wolf have been a large dog? Maybe. but no dog has glowing red eyes or disappears into thin air. Was the figure at the top of the stairs just a shadow or a trick of the light? Maybe, but shadows don't move on their own, and they definitely don't turn and walk into rooms. I've researched local wildlife, paranormal phenomena, even psychological explanations like shared hallucinations. Nothing fits exactly what my brother and I experienced. Sometimes I wonder if those things were connected to whatever my grandma was doing in that chapel room. Were they guardians she had summoned? Spirits she had communicated with? Or something darker that had attached itself to her or the house? I'll probably never know for sure. My brother remembers it all too, but he doesn't like talking about it. Says it gives him nightmares. My parents just change the subject when I bring it up. All I know is that what I saw that day in the yard was real. Those red eyes staring into mine were real, and whatever was waiting for us at the top of those stairs was real too. I still live in Connecticut, but I avoid driving past my grandma's old house. Last I heard, the family that bought it moved out after less than a year. The realtor listed personal reasons for the sale. The house has changed hands 3 times since my grandma died. Sometimes I wonder if that wolf is still there, watching and waiting for something or someone. Story 16. I still can't sleep properly without checking all the lights in my house before bed. It's been 27 years since everything happened in that house in Shadow Vale, but some scars don't heal. I've never told the full story to anyone outside my family. Even now, typing this makes my hands shake. We moved to Shadow Vale in the summer of '96. I was 12 then. My dad got a job at the paper mill about 20 minutes outside of town, and the house was dirt cheap. Should have been our first warning. It was this big old farmhouse from the 1920s with peeling white paint and creaky floorboards that moaned under your feet like something was alive beneath them. From the first night, I knew something was wrong with the kitchen. My 2 older brothers, Mike and Dan, shared the bedroom across from mine upstairs. My parents had the master bedroom downstairs. I was stuck with the small room at the end of the hall, the one closest to the stairs that led down to the kitchen. Looking back, I wonder if that's why I was the first to notice her. The trouble started about a week after we moved in. I woke up thirsty around 1 in the morning. When I went downstairs and hit the light switch in the kitchen, nothing happened. Pitch black. I figured the bulb was dead, so I used the light from the hallway to grab a glass of water. As I was filling it at the sink, I felt this coldness. Not like air conditioning cold. This was different. It felt like someone had draped a wet, freezing blanket over my shoulders. And then I felt it, eyes on my back, watching me. Hungry. I bolted upstairs without even turning the water off. The next morning, the kitchen light worked perfectly. Dad checked the switch, the bulb, everything. Nothing wrong with it. Must have been a loose connection, he said, but I knew better. This happened again the next night, and the night after that. The kitchen light would never work after dark. Not once. During the day, perfectly fine, but at night, nothing. About 2 weeks in, I heard it for the first time. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep despite being thirsty when I heard a sharp metallic bang from downstairs, like someone slammed a can down on the counter. Hard. I pulled my blanket up to my chin and held my breath. Bang, again, then again. Bang, bang, bang. My parents never heard it. Neither did my brothers at first, but our cat, Jinx, would sit at the top of the stairs and stare down toward the kitchen, his back arched, fur standing on end. One night, I worked up the courage to go down after hearing the banging. I needed to know. The hallway light was on, casting just enough light into the kitchen to see the outline of our counters and table. When I reached the doorway, I froze. All the soda cans from our pantry were lined up perfectly on the counter, every single one. I hadn't touched them. Nobody had. As I stood there, one of the cans suddenly lifted about an inch off the counter and slammed back down. My whole body went numb. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then another can did the same thing, and another. That's when I saw her for the first time, just for a split second. In the corner of the kitchen, a woman, tall and thin, too thin, like someone had stretched her, with long, stringy hair hanging over her face. But what I remember most were her eyes. They glowed white in the darkness, and she was smiling at me. Not a friendly smile, the kind of smile a wolf gives a rabbit. Then came the scream. It wasn't something I heard with my ears. It was inside my head, a sound that felt like fingernails scraping through my brain. I ran back upstairs and hid under my covers until morning. I tried telling my parents the next day. Mom looked worried, but Dad just laughed it off. Old houses make weird noises, Tyler. It's just the pipes or the foundation settling. But it got worse, so much worse. About a month after we moved in, we started finding dead animals in the kitchen. At first, we blamed Jinx, a mouse here, a small bird there, but then we found a squirrel completely flayed open, intestines arranged in a weird pattern on the linoleum. Jinx was an indoor cat, and there's no way he could have done that. The worst was the raven. I came down one morning to find this massive black raven dead in the middle of the kitchen floor. It was twice the size of Jinx, its wings spread out like it was pinned to a board, neck twisted completely around. My dad actually looked scared that time. He said he'd never seen a raven that big before. My brothers finally started believing me after they both saw her too. Mike was getting a midnight snack when he saw the woman standing by the refrigerator. He said she reached for him, her fingers unnaturally long, before he bolted. Dan saw her reflection in the kitchen window while washing dishes after dinner, standing right behind him. When he turned around, nothing was there. Mom started avoiding the kitchen after dark too, though she never admitted why. She'd make excuses about not being hungry or having already brushed her teeth. But I saw the fear in her eyes. Dad was the only holdout. He kept saying we were all feeding into each other's imaginations. But even he stopped going to the kitchen for his usual midnight snack. Then I started sleepwalking. I'd wake up in weird places, at the bottom of the stairs, in the living room, once even outside on the front lawn. The scariest part, I'd always wake up facing the kitchen. One morning after finding me asleep on the couch, Mom finally broke down and told me she'd been sleepwalking too. She'd wake up standing in front of the kitchen door, hand on the knob, with no memory of how she got there. She made me promise not to tell Dad. She was afraid he'd think she was losing it. I started doing research at the school library. The internet wasn't really a thing for us back then, so I read every book I could find about hauntings, spirits, and witches. A librarian noticed and recommended a book on home cleansing rituals. She gave me this weird look when she handed it to me, like she knew something. The book talked about sage burning, salt lines, and prayers. One in particular stood out, the Prayer of St. Michael. There was something about it that felt right, like it was meant for me to find. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, not even Mike and Dan. I stole some sage from Mom's herb garden and dried it in my room. I filled an empty salt shaker from the kitchen during daylight hours. I copied the St. Michael prayer onto a piece of paper and practiced it every night before bed. And then, on a Friday night in late October, I waited until everyone was asleep. I crept downstairs around midnight, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I carried a flashlight, my sage bundle, the salt, and my prayer paper. I was terrified, but I was also angry. This was our house, my family, and this thing was hurting us. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I hesitated. The darkness inside seemed thicker than normal, almost solid. My flashlight beam barely penetrated it, like the darkness was swallowing the light. "I know you're in there," I whispered, my voice shaking. "And I want you to leave us alone." The coldness hit me immediately, so intense it burned my skin. My flashlight flickered but stayed on. I stepped inside. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the banging started. Bang, 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 cans slamming all over the counter, some flying off entirely. The cabinets started opening and closing. The refrigerator door swung wildly, and the kitchen chairs scraped across the floor like someone was dragging them. I lit the sage with shaking hands, the flame catching after a few tries. Smoke filled the air, and I began walking the perimeter of the kitchen, waving the bundle like the book had shown. "The light of God surrounds us," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "No darkness can enter this home." That's when I heard her laugh, a low, gurgling sound like someone choking on liquid. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. In the corner of my eye, I saw her, more solid than before. Her white eyes burning holes in the darkness. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide in that terrible smile. She was by the sink one moment, then suddenly by the table, then right behind me, moving without actually moving. I continued the ritual, sprinkling salt along the baseboards, in the corners, across the doorways. My hands were shaking so badly I kept dropping it, but I didn't stop. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, I started reciting, my voice cracking. The screaming in my head began again, so loud I nearly dropped to my knees. It felt like someone was driving nails into my eardrums, but I kept going, tears streaming down my face. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil, I continued. The temperature dropped so low I could see my breath. The sage smoke began swirling unnaturally, forming shapes that looked almost like hands reaching for me. She appeared directly in front of me, her face inches from mine. I could smell her, like rotting meat and stagnant water. Her mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, I shouted now, not caring if I woke the whole house. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Something changed. The air felt lighter, the screaming in my head became less intense. The woman's form seemed to flicker like a TV with bad reception. I repeated the prayer again and again, walking around the kitchen, waving the sage, sprinkling the salt. For what felt like hours, I kept at it, even as my voice grew hoarse and my legs weak. The banging slowed. The cans stopped flying. The screaming in my head faded to a distant whine, then to nothing. The woman's form grew fainter and fainter until I could barely see the outline of her against the darkness. I don't remember falling asleep. The next thing I knew, my dad was shaking me awake. I was lying on the kitchen floor, the burnt-out sage bundle still clutched in my hand, salt scattered all around me. "Tyler, what the hell are you doing down here?" he asked, looking confused and worried. I sat up, disoriented. Sunlight was streaming through the kitchen windows. It was morning. "Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper from all the praying. "Try the light." He gave me a weird look but flipped the switch. The kitchen light came on. It was over. We lived in that house for 3 more years before Dad got transferred to another mill. In all that time, the kitchen light never failed again. The banging stopped. The dead animals stopped. The sleepwalking stopped. But sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I swear I can hear the faint echo of a can slamming down on a counter, and I'll always double-check that my kitchen light works after dark. Story 17. I've spent the last week trying to make sense of what happened in our bedroom last Saturday night. I'm not the type who believes in paranormal stuff. I'm a pretty logical guy, always looking for the rational explanation. But what I saw, I just can't explain it. We moved into this house in Ravenwood about 3 weeks ago. It's an older place, built in the 70s, but recently renovated. Nothing special or creepy about it, just a regular 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. My wife Sarah, our 4-year-old son Ethan and I were still getting used to the new space. That night started normally enough. We had dinner, watched some TV, and put Ethan to bed around 8. Sarah and I stayed up watching a movie, nothing scary or anything, just some comedy. We went to bed around 11:30. Around midnight, Ethan came into our room saying he was scared. This wasn't normal for him. He's always been a good sleeper, even when we traveled. But since the move, he'd been a bit clingy at bedtime, asking for extra stories and leaving his nightlight on. That night, though, he was actually trembling. "There's something in my room, Daddy," he whispered. I checked his room thoroughly. Under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing. I chalked it up to the new environment and the shadows being different from our old place. I let him climb into our bed, figuring we'd deal with it in the morning. I fell asleep pretty quickly with Ethan curled up between Sarah and me. I'm not sure how long I slept, but I woke up feeling Ethan wiggling against me. I was facing the corner of our bedroom, lying on my side. I remember opening my eyes without moving, still groggy. That's when I noticed it. In the corner of our room, about 4 feet from the bed, was a shadow, but not a normal shadow. This was darker, like impossibly dark. The room was dimly lit from the streetlight filtering through our blinds, but this corner seemed to swallow all that faint light. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. You know how when you wake up in the dark, sometimes shapes aren't quite right. I blinked a few times, expecting it to resolve into something ordinary. A pile of clothes maybe, or the shadow from our dresser, but it didn't change. If anything, it seemed to become more defined the longer I looked, and then it moved. It wasn't a sudden movement, more like a subtle shift. The shadow began to take shape, forming what looked like a person, tall and slim, maybe 5 or 6 feet high. It had no features I could make out, just this human-like silhouette standing perfectly still in our bedroom corner. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My first thought was that someone had broken in. We have a baseball bat under our bed for home defense, and I slowly moved my hands under the covers, trying not to alert the intruder that I was awake. When my fingers touched the bat, I took a deep breath and sprang up, ready to defend my family. But what happened next? I still can't believe what I saw. The moment I moved, the figure changed. It didn't run or jump or react like a person would. Instead, it melted. That's the only way I can describe it. This tall, person-shaped shadow instantly collapsed into a ball about the size of a basketball. The transformation took less than a second. Then this ball, this orb of darkness, moved. It didn't roll or bounce, it floated. It moved down along the length of our bed, turned when it reached the foot, and then shot straight out our bedroom door. The whole thing happened in the time it takes to snap your fingers. I sat on the edge of the bed, bat in hand, feeling my adrenaline surging. My breath was coming in short gasps. I looked back at Sarah and Ethan, but they were both still sound asleep, undisturbed by what had just happened. What freaked me out the most wasn't just that this thing had changed shape, it was how it looked. It wasn't casting a shadow, it was the shadow. No, that's not right either. It was like the absence of light, like a hole in reality. And it didn't touch the ground as it left. It moved just above the height of our bed, floating. I checked my phone, 2:55 in the morning. I took a screenshot of the time, as if I needed to prove to myself later that I had been awake, that this wasn't just some vivid dream. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My first instinct was to wake Sarah, but I didn't want to scare Ethan. I decided to check the house. I grabbed my pistol from the safe in our closet and systematically went through every room, turning on lights as I went. Nothing. No doors or windows were open. No sign of an intruder. The house was completely secure. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, pistol on the coffee table, until dawn. I kept trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a shadow from a passing car, but the way it moved, the way it changed shape. Cars don't cause shadows to do that. The next morning, I was a wreck. Sarah noticed immediately and asked what was wrong. I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding crazy, so I just said I hadn't slept well. I didn't want to scare her or Ethan. But later that afternoon, while Ethan was napping, Sarah brought up something that made my blood run cold. "Something weird happened last night," she said casually. "I got up around 1 to use the bathroom, and when I was walking back, I looked down the hallway past our bedroom door. I thought I saw someone standing in the office. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up." "What do you mean, like an intruder?" "I don't know," she said. "It was just a shape, like a person standing there, but when I looked more carefully, there was nothing. I figured it was just shadows from the tree outside the window or something." I couldn't believe it. Sarah had seen something too about 2 hours before my experience. I finally told her what I'd seen, and we spent the rest of the day debating what it could have been. We've checked the house's history. No deaths or anything suspicious reported. We've looked for gas leaks, carbon monoxide, anything that could cause hallucinations. Nothing. It's been a week now, and nothing else has happened. Ethan still sometimes says he's scared at night, but kids say that, right? We've installed a better security system and more night lights. I sleep with the bat closer now, but I can't stop thinking about what I saw. That perfect darkness. The way it moved. The way it changed from a human shape to that orb in an instant. The way it seemed to absorb the light around it rather than block it. I'm not saying it was supernatural. I'm still looking for a logical explanation. Maybe it was some kind of waking dream or a strange optical illusion. But Sarah saw something too, and that's what really bothers me. Whatever it was, I know what I saw, and I can't help but wonder if it's still here, somewhere in our house, watching us. I've caught myself staring at the corners of rooms, especially at night, half expecting to see that impossible darkness gathering again. I don't know what to do. We can't afford to move again so soon. And what if whatever it is follows us? I'm writing this, hoping someone else has experienced something similar and might have answers. I've never believed in ghosts or shadow people or whatever, but after what I saw that night, I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that there was something in our bedroom, something that shouldn't exist, and I have no idea if it's gone for good or just waiting to return. Story 18. I've been debating whether to share this for months. I'm not really sure what to make of it even now, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. This happened last September when my grandmother Elena passed away. My grandma was the heart of our family. Everyone in Westbrook knew her. She was that sweet old lady who'd bring homemade empanadas to every community event and somehow remembered everyone's birthdays without Facebook reminders. When she got sick last summer, it hit us all hard. The cancer moved fast, and within 2 months, she was gone. In our family tradition, we bring the body home before burial for a final night with family. Some people think it's weird or old-fashioned, but it's been our way for generations. The funeral home prepared her body and delivered her to our family home in a simple wooden coffin the day before the funeral service. My mom insisted we dress Grandma in her favorite blue dress, the one she wore to all our special occasions. She also placed Grandma's old flip phone in the coffin beside her hand. It sounds strange, but Grandma was weirdly attached to that ancient Nokia. She refused to upgrade even though we bought her smartphones for 2 Christmases in a row. "This one works just fine," she'd always say. My mom thought she'd want it with her wherever she was going. The coffin was placed in the living room, and family members started arriving throughout the morning. The house filled with people sharing stories about Grandma, some crying, others laughing about good memories. I was helping my mom in the kitchen when it happened for the first time. Everything went dark, just like that. The lights, the refrigerator, everything electrical just stopped. My Uncle Carlos went to check the breaker box in the utility room and found the main power switch flipped off. He turned it back on, muttering something about old wiring. We didn't think much of it at the time. About an hour later, it happened again. We were in the middle of lunch when everything shut down. Carlos checked again. Same thing. The main switch was off. This time he was confused because he was certain he had secured it properly before. By the third time, people were getting uncomfortable. It was around 2 in the afternoon, and the house was packed with relatives and neighbors. Carlos found the switch off again and was visibly frustrated. Someone must be messing with it, he said, but nobody would admit to it, and honestly, who would play such a stupid prank during a wake? The 4th blackout happened during a prayer session. This time my cousin Marco went with Carlos to check, and they both confirmed no one was near the utility room when it happened. People were starting to whisper. I overheard my Aunt Maria say something about signs and Elena trying to tell us something. I was trying to be the rational one. Old houses have electrical problems all the time, especially when they're suddenly full of people using appliances, charging phones, whatever. But then something happened that I still can't explain away. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Abuela Elena. I nearly dropped my phone. I stared at the screen, frozen, watching it ring once, twice, and then stop. A missed call notification appeared. I immediately looked toward the coffin, where I could clearly see her phone still placed beside her hand, exactly where my mom had put it hours earlier. I didn't tell anyone at first. I thought maybe I was seeing things, or perhaps someone had her old number already. But then my sister came up to me, her face white as a sheet. "Did you just get a call from Grandma's phone?" she whispered. My blood ran cold. "You too?" Before we could discuss it further, my cousin Lucia joined us, eyes wide. "Guys, something weird just happened. I got a call from Abuela's number." By this point, we were freaking out. We discreetly checked Grandma's phone in the coffin. It was powered off, as it had been since she passed. We tried turning it on just to check, but the battery was dead. There was absolutely no way it could be making calls. The fifth blackout hit around 5 in the afternoon. This time, when the lights came back on, my Uncle Miguel was standing in the living room looking terrified. He said he'd received a call from Grandma's number too, but when he answered, all he heard was static and what sounded like distant crying. The sixth and seventh blackouts came in quick succession as evening fell. Each time, the main switch was found flipped off, with no explanation. By now, even the skeptics in the family were unnerved. Some of the neighbors decided to leave early, making polite excuses. Throughout the night, 3 more family members received calls from Grandma's number. No one heard anything on the other end, just silence or static. But the coincidence was impossible to ignore. We were all on edge, jumping at every sound, yet somehow none of us wanted to leave. It felt like Grandma needed us there, like she was trying to say goodbye in her own way. The funeral the next day was beautiful, but emotionally draining. We buried Grandma in the small cemetery on the edge of town, next to Grandpa, who'd passed 10 years earlier. Her phone was still in the coffin with her. My mom insisted, despite everything that had happened. "If she wants to call us, let her," she said through tears, half joking, half serious. I thought that would be the end of the strange occurrences. It wasn't. 3 days after the funeral, most of the out-of-town relatives had gone home, but a few of us were still staying at Grandma's house, sorting through her belongings and dealing with paperwork. My younger brother Miguel, named after our uncle, was napping there alone while my parents, my 5-year-old brother Tomas and I went to pick up some groceries. Grandma's house was at the end of a long driveway with an automatic gate that needed a remote to open. We'd been using it all week without issues. When we returned from the store, my dad realized he'd forgotten the gate remote. "I'll call Miguel to open it for us," he sighed, reaching for his phone. But before he could dial, the gate started moving. It slowly swung open, creaking slightly the way it always did. We looked at each other, surprised but grateful. "Miguel must have seen us from the window," my mom said. We drove in, unloaded the groceries, and found Miguel just walking into the kitchen, hair messy, eyes still puffy from sleep. "Thanks for getting the gate," my dad said. Miguel looked confused. "What?" "The gate. Thanks for opening it for us just now." Miguel's face drained of color. He shook his head slowly. "I just woke up. I was asleep." We all stood there, looking at each other, a chill running through the room. "But if you didn't open the gate, who did?" my mom whispered. Miguel swallowed hard. "I was dreaming about Abuela just now. She was sitting on the edge of my bed, stroking my hair like she used to when I was little. She told me you all would be home soon, but that I should keep resting. She said..." His voice cracked. "She said she would open the gate for you while I continued my nap." The kitchen was dead silent. I felt goosebumps rising on my arms despite the warm day. Then my little brother Thomas, who had been quietly unpacking a bag of apples, looked up with the innocent expression only a 5-year-old can have. "I saw Abuela too," he said matter-of-factly. "She was standing by the gate when we drove in. She was smiling and waving at us." My mom dropped the can she was holding. None of us had seen anything by the gate. "What did she look like, honey?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. Like abuela, Tomas shrugged. She was wearing her blue dress, the pretty one, and she wasn't coughing anymore. The blue dress, the same one we'd buried her in. We didn't talk much for the rest of that day. What could we say? We couldn't explain it, but all of us felt it. A presence in the house, familiar and comforting, despite how terrifying the circumstances were. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those phone calls, the power outages, the gate opening by itself. Part of me was scared, but another part felt strangely at peace. It was as if Grandma was telling us she was still watching over us, that death wasn't really the end. The strange events stopped after that day. No more mysterious calls, no more unexplained blackouts. But sometimes when I visit Grandma's house, I swear I can smell her perfume just faintly, like she's just left the room. And once, when I was particularly upset about a breakup, all the lights in my apartment flickered 3 times in a row, just like Grandma used to knock on my door 3 times before entering. I don't know what to make of all this. I'm not particularly religious or into the paranormal, but I know what we experienced, and I can't explain it. All I know is that sometimes love seems to be stronger than death, and sometimes, just sometimes, those we've lost find ways to let us know they're still around. I still have that missed call notification saved on my phone. I can't bring myself to delete it. Story 19. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened to me 3 months ago. I've read through hundreds of paranormal forums since then, looking for someone who's experienced something similar. Nothing comes close. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here will understand or have an explanation. Last October, I was working at this theme park's Halloween event. I was 18, first job out of high school, and honestly just excited to make some money before college. The park transforms for Halloween with these elaborate scare mazes, and I worked in this really old building that housed 2 of them. The building itself dated back to the mid-1800s. It was originally some kind of factory before being converted decades ago. The job was pretty straightforward. During opening hours, I'd be stationed at different points in the mazes, sometimes as a scare actor, sometimes just guiding people or checking wristbands. But after closing, we had to do a final sweep through both mazes to make sure no guests were hiding or had gotten lost. So this particular night, it was a Thursday, I remember, because we closed earlier than weekend nights, my supervisor Jake assigned me and 2 other employees, Megan and Chris, to do the final sweep. We always started with the basement maze first. This one had a laboratory gone wrong theme, with all these fake specimen jars, medical equipment, and creepy lighting. The 3 of us spread out slightly as we walked through. I can still smell the basement's musty odor mixed with the fog machine liquid and latex props. That basement was always cold, even in summer, but during Halloween with minimal lighting, it was downright eerie. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional drip from pipes overhead. As we approached the specimen storage section, a room with floor-to-ceiling shelves of jars containing fake body parts and creatures, I noticed something off about one of the displays. There was this jar that seemed out of place, and the liquid inside was clearer than the murky green stuff in the others. I'm detail-oriented, and I swear this jar wasn't there during my shift earlier. "Hey guys, hold up a sec," I called out, but Megan and Chris had already moved ahead to the next room. I stepped closer to examine the jar, and that's when I remembered there was a staff shortcut, what we called a rat run, right behind that shelf section. These shortcuts were narrow corridors that let staff move quickly between sections without going through the whole maze. I decided to use the shortcut to catch up with the others. I pushed through the hidden door behind the shelf and stepped into the narrow passage. These rat runs were utilitarian, just plain walls, normal lighting, and usually some props or equipment stored along the sides. But this one felt different immediately. It was colder than usual, and the emergency lights were dimmer than they should have been. That's when I saw him, a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing about 15 feet ahead of me in the passage. My first thought was that a guest had somehow gotten into the staff area. He was facing away from me, just standing there motionless. The weird thing was his clothes. He wasn't wearing modern clothes, but something that looked like old-fashioned shorts with long socks and some kind of buttoned shirt with a collar, the kind of outfit you'd see in photos from 100 years ago. "Hey buddy, you can't be back here," I said, keeping my voice friendly. "Let me help you find your parents." The boy turned his head, just his head, not his body, and looked at me. His face was pale, almost gray in the dim light. His eyes seemed too dark, too deep set. He didn't speak, just stared. I took a step closer. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" That's when he bolted, running away from me down the corridor. I called out again and started after him. But when I reached the turn in the passage where he should have been, there was nothing, just an empty corridor stretching to the exit door. That door had one of those alarm bars that would sound if opened, and it was untouched. There was literally nowhere else he could have gone. No side doors, no hiding spots. I felt the hairs on my arms standing up. I hurried through the rest of the rat run and emerged back into the main maze route, finding Megan and Chris waiting by the exit. "Took you long enough," Chris said, checking his phone. I almost told them about the boy, but stopped myself. They'd probably just think I was trying to scare them, or that I was seeing things because of the dim lighting and Halloween atmosphere. So I just mumbled something about checking a prop that looked loose. "Well, basement's clear," Megan said, marking something on her clipboard. "Let's head to the upper maze." The upper maze was on the 3rd floor of the building, with the 2nd floor being used for storage and staff breaks. This upper maze was much larger than the basement one, themed like a haunted Victorian mansion with different rooms representing various nightmarish scenarios. There was a library section, a kitchen with cannibalistic scenes, a nursery with creepy dolls, and at the far end, the dollhouse room, which was basically a life-size dollhouse where the dolls, actors during operating hours, would chase guests out toward the exit. The 3 of us started at the entrance, again spreading out slightly to cover more ground. The upper maze took about 15 minutes to walk through normally, even without stopping for the scare actors to do their bits. We'd been walking for maybe 5 minutes, passing through the library section, when I decided to check a small side room that was dressed up as a study. I remember pushing aside a heavy velvet curtain that separated this room from the main path. The room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with fake bookshelves, an antique desk, and some creepy portraits on the walls. I looked around quickly, confirming no guests were hiding there. And that's when it happened. As I turned to leave, the curtain fell back into place. I reached out to push it aside again, but my hand touched nothing. The curtain was gone. In fact, everything was gone. The room, the props, the dim lighting, all of it vanished in an instant. I was standing in perfect, absolute darkness. Not the kind of darkness where your eyes eventually adjust and you can make out shapes. This was complete, total blackness, and it was completely silent. No creaking floors, no distant sounds of my co-workers, no hum of the building's old heating system, nothing. But the strangest part was the air. It wasn't cold or warm. It had no temperature at all. I couldn't even feel air on my skin, like being suspended in some kind of void. I couldn't tell if I was in a large space or a tiny closet. The darkness seemed to press against my eyeballs and the silence rang in my ears. I froze, too shocked to even call out. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. After what felt like forever but was probably just seconds, I managed to whisper, "Hello?" Nothing. My voice didn't even echo. It was like the darkness swallowed the sound. I raised my voice slightly. "Megan? Chris?" Still nothing. Panic started setting in. I reached out my hands but felt nothing around me. I took a cautious step forward, then another, then a third. With that third step, I noticed something. A thin sliver of light, like a crack in a wall, about 10 feet ahead of me. I moved toward it carefully, my hands still outstretched. As I got closer, I could see it was indeed a gap, like a seam in the darkness. I reached it and peered through, seeing what looked like colored light on the other side. Without thinking, because at this point anywhere seemed better than this void, I pushed at the gap. It widened easily, like parting curtains, and I stepped through. I emerged into the dollhouse room, the very last section of the maze, at least a 10-minute walk from where I'd been in the study room. The normal maze lighting was back. I could hear the building's ambient sounds again, and the air had returned to its usual slightly stuffy state. I stood there, utterly disoriented. Had I blacked out and sleepwalked here? Had I somehow lost time? But it had only felt like seconds in that dark place. Before I could process what happened, I heard Megan calling my name from somewhere in the maze. A minute later, she and Chris burst into the dollhouse room looking worried. "There you are," Megan exclaimed. "Where the hell did you go?" "Yeah, man," Chris added. "We've been looking everywhere for you for like 10 minutes. I turned around to look at where I'd come through, expecting to see the dark gap or some kind of doorway. There was nothing there. Just the normal dollhouse wall with its creepy painted facade and fake windows. No seam, no gap, no door. Nothing to explain how I'd traveled from one end of the maze to the other in 3 steps. I stammered, still staring at the wall. "I was just in the study room, and then—" "The study? That's way back near the entrance," Chris said. "How'd you get here so fast?" I couldn't explain it. I still can't. I told them I must have taken a wrong turn and found another rat run I didn't know about. They seemed skeptical but didn't push it. We finished our sweep and clocked out for the night. I never saw the boy in old-fashioned clothes again, though I looked for him every night after that. I asked the senior staff if there had ever been reports of strange things in the building, trying to be casual about it. One older employee mentioned that the building had once been a clothing factory where a fire had killed several workers, including some child laborers, back in the 1880s. I worked there until the Halloween season ended 2 weeks later, but nothing like that ever happened again. I didn't use any of the rat runs for the rest of my time there. I'm still trying to understand what happened. Was it a momentary hallucination, some kind of weird time slip? Did that little boy lead me into whatever that dark place was? And how did I cross the entire length of the maze in 3 steps? I've measured it out based on the building's dimensions. To get from the study to the dollhouse room normally requires walking through at least 7 distinct sections of the maze, covering approximately 200 feet. There's no physical way I could have moved that distance in those few seconds. I still get chills thinking about that perfect darkness, that absolute silence, that strange feeling of standing in a place with no temperature. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I'm back there, suspended in that void, and I have to turn on every light in my apartment to convince myself I'm not. Story 20. I've never been particularly superstitious or religious. Growing up, my family went to church on Christmas and Easter, but that was about it. I've always considered myself a practical person who needs evidence before believing in something. That changed last summer. My girlfriend Sarah and I decided to take seasonal jobs at a touristy beach bar in a small coastal town in Greece. The pay wasn't great, but we got to live near the Mediterranean for 3 months, which seemed like a fair trade. We found a small apartment to rent from a local family. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom with a shower that barely worked half the time. But it was cheap and close to the beach, so we were happy. The first few days were exactly what you'd expect, getting settled into our new jobs, exploring the town, figuring out where to buy groceries, that sort of thing. The elderly couple who owned the apartment lived next door and barely spoke English, but they were incredibly kind. The grandmother, Yaya as they say in Greece, kept bringing us homemade food and smiling at us. It was on our 3rd day there that I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. In Sarah's bedroom, above the headboard, was a small, simple painting of Jesus. You know the type: solemn face, halo, hands raised in blessing. Nothing unusual for Greece, really. The whole country is dotted with churches and little shrines on nearly every street corner. Should we take it down? I asked Sarah that evening as we were getting ready for bed. She shrugged. I don't really care. It's not bothering me. Neither of us was religious, but we also didn't feel strongly about removing it, so it stayed there for the first week. After a particularly exhausting shift, the bar had been packed with tourists. Sarah mentioned that the painting was creeping her out a bit. I feel like it's watching me while I sleep, she said, half joking. Let's just take it down then, I replied. We carefully removed it from the wall and stored it in the closet, wrapping it in a towel to make sure it didn't get damaged. I remember feeling a little uneasy about it, like we were being disrespectful, but I brushed the feeling aside. It was just a painting after all. That night changed everything. I was in a deep sleep when I felt Sarah shaking me awake. Her voice was tight with fear. "Alex, Alex, wake up," she whispered urgently. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. 3:15 in the morning. "What's wrong?" I mumbled, still half asleep. "There's someone standing at the end of the bed." That woke me up instantly. I sat bolt upright, heart pounding. "What? Where?" "Right there," she pointed, her hand trembling. "Standing right there, watching us." I couldn't see anything in the darkness. Without thinking, I reached for the lamp on the bedside table and switched it on. The sudden light made me squint, but I could see clearly that there was nobody there. The bedroom door was closed, the window shut. We were alone. "There's nothing there, Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You must have been dreaming." She was shaking her head vigorously. "No, I wasn't. I woke up and felt someone watching me. When I opened my eyes, there was a man standing right there." She pointed again to the foot of the bed. He was just standing there looking at me. I got up and checked the entire apartment. Both bedrooms, the bathroom, the kitchen, behind the curtains, under the beds. Everything was locked from the inside, and there was definitely nobody there. "It was just a nightmare," I assured her, though I wasn't feeling so certain myself. The apartment felt different somehow, colder despite the summer heat. "Let's try to go back to sleep." It took Sarah over an hour to calm down enough to close her eyes again. I held her until her breathing became regular, but I stayed awake much longer, listening for any sounds, watching the shadows on the wall. The next day, we both felt exhausted. Sarah was quiet during breakfast, and I could tell she was still thinking about what had happened. "Do you think it has something to do with the painting?" she finally asked. "No," I said firmly, though the thought had crossed my mind too. "It was just a bad dream. We've been working hard, eating different food, sleeping in a strange place. It's normal to have weird dreams." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. That evening we went out for dinner at a local taverna, had a few glasses of wine, and tried to laugh off the events of the previous night. By the time we went to bed, we were both feeling better, and I was sure we'd sleep through the night. I was wrong. This time it was around 2:30 in the morning when Sarah woke me again. But something was different. Her voice wasn't panicked like before. It was oddly calm, almost curious. "Alex," she whispered. "He's back." Instead of immediately turning on the light like last time, I whispered back, "Where?" "He's sitting on the edge of the bed now, on your side." A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't feel anything. No depression in the mattress, no sense of someone sitting there, but the certainty in Sarah's voice made the hair on my arms stand up. "What does he look like?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Young, maybe in his 20s. Dark hair. He's wearing different clothes than last night. A white t-shirt, I think." My heart was hammering so hard I was sure Sarah could hear it. Are you scared?" That's when she said something that still haunts me. "No," she replied, sounding surprised at her own answer. "I'm not scared at all. It's strange. I feel like I know him somehow, like I've always known him." This made no sense. Sarah was usually jumpy about everything. She'd scream if she saw a spider the size of a pinhead. She made me check behind shower curtains in hotel rooms, and now she was calmly describing a stranger sitting on our bed in the middle of the night. "Should I turn on the light?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. "He's just sitting there. He looks sad." "No, not exactly sad. More like concerned." I couldn't take it anymore. I reached over and switched on the lamp. The bed was empty. The room was empty, just like the night before. But this time Sarah didn't seem relieved or like she was waking from a nightmare. Instead, she looked disappointed. "He's gone," she said simply, "as soon as you turned on the light." We stayed awake for the rest of the night, talking. Sarah insisted that what she had seen wasn't a dream. She had been fully awake both times, and the figure had been absolutely real to her. And the strangest part was how she felt about it. This inexplicable sense of familiarity, of comfort even. The next morning, we called our families back home. We didn't tell them about what had happened. That seemed too crazy. But just hearing their voices made us feel more grounded. When Sarah was talking to her mom, I heard her ask some questions about her family history that seemed odd. After the call, she was quiet for a long time. "What's going on?" I finally asked. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I just found out." She took a deep breath. "My mom had a baby before me, a boy. He died a few days after he was born, some kind of heart defect. They named him Michael. He would have been 2 years older than me." "You never knew about this?" I asked, shocked. She shook her head. "They don't talk about it. It was too painful. But when I asked Mom if there were any family members who died young, she told me, Alex, he would have been in his 20s now, the same age as the man I saw." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss it all as coincidence, but another part was starting to wonder if something truly inexplicable was happening. "Do you think," I began hesitantly, "do you think it could be him, your brother?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But it would explain why I wasn't afraid, why I felt like I knew him." That night, we decided to move the beds together and sleep with all the lights on. We were both exhausted from 2 nights of interrupted sleep, but also too keyed up to rest properly. I don't think either of us expected to sleep much, but we did. We slept soundly through the entire night. No visitors, no disturbances. The next day, Sarah suggested we put the painting back. "It feels wrong to have it in the closet," she said. I agreed, and we hung it back in its original place above the bed. For the rest of our time in Greece, nearly 3 months, nothing unusual happened again. No more nighttime visitors, no more strange experiences. Life went back to normal, working at the beach bar, swimming in the crystal clear waters, eating too much feta cheese. But things between Sarah and me had subtly changed. We found ourselves having long conversations about life after death, about family connections that transcend the physical world. Sarah started lighting candles at some of the little roadside shrines we passed, something she would have scoffed at before. One evening, near the end of our stay, we were sitting on our tiny balcony watching the sunset when Sarah said, "I think he came to check on me, to let me know he exists." I didn't argue. How could I? I hadn't seen what she'd seen, but I'd witnessed how profoundly it had affected her, and the timing, right after we'd removed the painting, was too specific to be mere coincidence. It's been 8 months since we returned home. We don't talk about those nights very often, but I know Sarah thinks about her brother frequently. She keeps a small photo frame on her bedside table now, empty, with no picture in it. When I asked her about it, she just smiled and said, "It's for Michael." I still don't know what to believe. Was it really the spirit of Sarah's brother? Was it something else entirely? Or was it all just an elaborate series of dreams and coincidences? All I know is that something happened in that small apartment in Greece that I can't explain. And while I still consider myself a rational person, I've learned that there are some experiences that defy rational explanation, some connections that can't be broken, even by death. And I never ever remove religious symbols from the walls of places I'm staying anymore, just in case. Story 21 AM. It's been almost a year since it happened, and I still can't sleep with mirrors in my room. I've tried to rationalize it, I've tried to forget it, but I can't shake what I saw that night, so I guess writing about it might help, or at least like a child, and it was facing me directly. I couldn't see a face. There wasn't a face, but I could tell it was looking right at me. I felt it. I felt its attention on me, if that makes any sense. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds. As soon as my brain registered what I was seeing, the thing moved, not like walking. It was more like it glided, but super fast. It went straight toward my mirror and then just went into it, like the mirror swallowed it up, and then it was gone. I'm not exaggerating when I say my heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I've never experienced anything like that before. It was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My whole body broke out in this cold sweat, even though my room was still hot as hell. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I was just frozen there, staring at the mirror, expecting that thing to come back out. When I finally could move, I practically lunged for my bedside lamp and turned it on. My hands were shaking so bad I almost knocked the lamp over. I grabbed my phone to check the time, 3:07 a.m. I'd either been asleep for just over half an hour, or I'd been lying there with my eyes closed for that long before they snapped open. Either way, it was around 3 a.m. when I saw whatever that was. I sat there for a while, just staring at the mirror from my bed, with all the lights on. Part of me was trying to convince myself it was just a dream, or maybe my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark. But I knew I was awake. I was completely lucid, and that thing, that outline, it was so clear, so distinct. I could still see it in my mind, that glowing white border of a child-sized person. After about 20 minutes of sitting there terrified, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and my pillow and practically ran to my parents' room. I hadn't slept in their room since I was like 8 when I had a bad dream, but this wasn't a dream. I knocked on their door, probably a bit too hard because my dad answered it looking all panicked, like something was seriously wrong. I guess something was. I was standing there, pale as a ghost, bad choice of words, I know, shaking and on the verge of tears. I saw something in my room, was all I could say at first. My mom was sitting up in bed now too, looking concerned. I tried to explain what had happened, but I kept stumbling over my words. There was this outline, like a glowing white outline of a person, but I could see through it, and it went into my mirror. My dad looked at me like I'd lost my mind. My mom was a bit more sympathetic. She patted the bed next to her. "You were having a nightmare, honey," she said. "Or maybe it was sleep paralysis. I've read about that. People see all sorts of things." I wasn't paralyzed, I insisted. And I wasn't dreaming. I was awake. It was real. I was getting frustrated because I knew what I saw, and it wasn't just some dream. My dad sighed and rubbed his eyes. "Look, if it'll make you feel better, you can sleep in here with your mom, and I'll go sleep in your room." Part of me felt bad about kicking my dad out of his bed, but mostly I was just relieved I wouldn't have to go back in there. Not with that mirror. "Can you cover the mirror?" I asked him before he left. He looked at me like I was being ridiculous, but agreed just to humor me. He came back a few minutes later with a towel draped over my dresser mirror. "Nothing in there," he reported. "Just your messy room." I ended up sleeping with my mom that night, though sleeping is generous. I mostly just laid there, wide awake, replaying what I'd seen over and over in my head. When morning finally came, I was exhausted, but also kind of relieved. Weird stuff always seems less scary in the daylight. Over breakfast, my parents tried to rationalize what had happened. My dad suggested it might have been light from a passing car reflecting in my mirror. My mom stuck with her sleep paralysis theory. My little brother, who's 13 and thinks he knows everything, suggested I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation because I stay up too late on my phone. Maybe they were right. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But none of their theories explained why I felt so certain that what I saw was looking at me, or why it moved so deliberately into the mirror. That afternoon, I did what any teenager would do. I went online and started researching. I looked up things like transparent outline ghost and entity going into mirror and seeing glowing figure at 3 a.m. I found all sorts of stuff about the witching hour and how 3 a.m. is supposedly when the veil between our world and the spirit world is thinnest. I read about mirrors being portals or doorways for spirits. Some cultures even cover mirrors after someone dies to prevent the soul from getting trapped in them. The more I read, the more convinced I became that what I saw was real. It wasn't a dream or a hallucination or a trick of the light. It was something else, something not from our world. That night, I refused to sleep in my room. I dragged my mattress into my brother's room and slept on his floor. He thought I was being stupid, but he didn't argue too much. I think even he was a little freaked out, though he'd never admit it. For the next week, I avoided my room as much as possible. When I had to go in there, I kept the mirror covered with a sheet. My parents were starting to get concerned. They suggested maybe I should talk to someone, like a therapist, about what happened. They thought I was developing some kind of anxiety disorder or phobia, but I knew what I saw, and no amount of therapy was going to convince me otherwise. Eventually, I had to move back into my room. I couldn't sleep on my brother's floor forever, but I made some changes first. I moved my dresser so the mirror didn't face my bed anymore. I got blackout curtains for my window, and I started using a sleep mask, so even if my eyes did suddenly open in the middle of the night, I wouldn't see anything. It's been almost a year now, and I haven't seen the outline child again. But I still get this creeping feeling sometimes when I'm alone in my room, like something is watching me, waiting for me to look at the mirror. I've thought about taking the mirror down completely, but that feels like admitting that what I saw was real, and sometimes I still try to tell myself it wasn't. The weirdest part of all this, a few weeks after it happened, I was helping my mom clean out some old boxes in the attic. We found a photo album from when the previous owners lived in our house. Apparently, they left it behind when they moved. There was a family picture taken in what is now my bedroom. They had a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was standing right where I saw the outline, in the exact spot between the bed and the mirror. I asked my mom if she knew what happened to the family. She said they moved away after living here for about 15 years. She didn't know much else about them. I've tried looking them up online, but I don't have much to go on. Just a last name and the knowledge that they used to live in our house sometime in the early 2000s. I haven't found anything that explains what I saw that night. Sometimes I wonder if I should try to contact them, ask if anything strange happened while they lived here, or if their daughter ever experienced anything unusual in that room. But then I think, what if the reason they moved was because of something that happened to her? What if that outline I saw was her? I don't know. Maybe it was just a weird hallucination. Maybe my subconscious somehow knew about that photo in the attic even though I'd never seen it. Maybe it was just a random fluke of brain chemistry at 3 in the morning. But every time I pass by a mirror, especially at night, I can't help but glance away, just in case something's looking back. Story 22. I've never been the type of person to believe in supernatural stuff, ghosts, spirits, whatever. That was always Ryan's thing. He watches those ghost hunting shows and loves telling me about weird Reddit posts he finds. Me? I'm pretty level-headed, at least I thought I was until last Tuesday night. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened in our apartment. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, tried to come up with logical explanations, but nothing really fits. Some background. Ryan and I have been living in this top-floor apartment in Portland for almost 2 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place with a small kitchen and living room. We have 2 dogs, Milo and Benny, who basically serve as our furry alarm systems. They bark at literally everything. Delivery people, neighbors in the hallway, squirrels outside the window, you name it. Tuesday night started like any other. Ryan fell asleep around 10:30 while I stayed up scrolling through my phone. I've always been the night owl between us. Around 11, I put my phone down and tried to sleep, but my brain wouldn't shut off. You know how it is, thinking about work deadlines, wondering if I remembered to pay the electric bill, mentally planning what to wear the next day. I was lying there for maybe 20 minutes when this feeling washed over me. It's hard to describe if you've never felt it, but it was like an awareness. Like when you can tell someone's staring at you from across a room, except this was intense. My skin was crawling. The feeling was coming from our bathroom doorway, which is directly across from our bed. The door was open, and it was dark inside, but I could swear someone was standing there watching me. I know how that sounds, but I was completely convinced there was a presence there. I froze. I mean, completely froze. Ryan was asleep next to me, breathing deeply, completely oblivious. The dogs were asleep at the foot of the bed. Nobody made a sound. I remember thinking, if I don't look directly at it, maybe it'll go away. Stupid, right? But that's what went through my head. The feeling got so intense that I was mentally bracing myself, like I expected someone to reach out and touch me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I just lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, until eventually I must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion. When our alarm went off at 5:15 the next morning, I had almost forgotten about it. Ryan and I get up early to hit the gym before work. I stumbled to the bathroom, still half asleep, to put in my contacts. Here's where things get weird. I opened a fresh pair of contacts, even though I had an open pair from the day before. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I was barely awake and running on autopilot. I noticed a tube of off-brand Aquaphor on the counter was open, so I closed it and put it back in the drawer. Again, didn't think much of it. Maybe Ryan had used it and forgot to close it. We went to the gym, had a normal day at work, came home, had dinner, watched some TV. Completely normal Wednesday. When it was time for bed, I went to take out my contacts and clean them before sleep. That's when I saw it. When I opened my contact case, the left compartment was 3/4 filled with a thick, gel-like substance. It looked exactly like that Aquaphor-type balm I'd put away that morning. The right side just had regular contact solution with my old lens from the previous day floating in it. I stood there staring at it, completely confused. I called Ryan over, and he was just as baffled. "Did you do this as a joke?" I asked him, but I knew he wouldn't mess with my contacts. He knows how expensive they are and how paranoid I am about eye infections. "No way," he said, looking as confused as I felt. "Why would I put that in there?" That's when two memories hit me. The feeling of being watched from the bathroom doorway the night before, and the open Aquaphor tube I'd found that morning. A chill ran down my spine as I connected these dots. Neither Ryan nor I have ever sleepwalked, not once in our lives, and our dogs would have definitely barked if either of us had gotten up during the night. They wake up at the slightest movement, plus the contact case had been tightly closed. That thick balm couldn't have just squeezed itself in there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd done it myself without remembering. But when would I have done that? And why? There's no reason I would ever put Aquaphor in my contact case. It doesn't make any sense. This wasn't the first strange thing to happen in our apartment either. Twice in the past month, we've heard clear, deliberate knocking on our bedroom wall, the wall that doesn't border any other apartments. It's an exterior wall, and we're on the top floor. There's literally nothing on the other side except for the roof and the sky. The first time it happened, we both shot up in bed. It was 3 knocks in a row, clear as day, like someone was standing there knocking to get our attention. The dogs went nuts, barking and jumping at the wall. Ryan got up and checked outside our apartment door, then looked out all the windows. Nothing. The second time was almost exactly the same. 3 knocks, same wall, same time of night, around 2 in the morning. Again, the dogs freaked out. Again, we found nothing. After the contact case incident, I started paying more attention to other small things I'd previously brushed off, like how sometimes items aren't where I leave them, or how occasionally the bathroom door is closed when I know I left it open. I always blamed Ryan, and he blamed me, but now I'm not so sure. That night, after finding the Aquaphor in my contact case, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at that bathroom doorway, half expecting to see something. Ryan tried to comfort me, suggesting maybe I did it myself while half asleep, but I know I didn't. I've never sleepwalked or done anything like that in my 26 years of life. Why would it suddenly start now? I ended up sleeping with the bathroom light on for the next few nights. Ryan teased me a little but was understanding. He even suggested we get a camera to set up in our room, just to see if either of us is moving around at night without remembering. But here's the really unsettling part. The night after finding the Aquaphor, I was lying in bed again, this time with Ryan still awake beside me. I felt that same watching sensation. Without saying anything to Ryan, I glanced over at him and noticed he was staring at the bathroom doorway with a tense expression. "Do you feel that?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. "Like someone's watching us?" My blood ran cold. He felt it too. That's when both dogs suddenly woke up and started growling at the doorway. Not their usual excited barking at a random noise, but a low, threatening growl I'd never heard from them before. The hair on their backs was standing up. I've never seen our dogs act like that, ever. They're friendly goofballs who love everyone, but they were staring at that empty doorway like they were facing down a threat. Ryan turned on the light, and of course, there was nothing there. We checked the entire apartment, closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. But that feeling didn't go away for hours. We've been sleeping with all the lights on since then. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever was watching me that Tuesday night was the same thing that somehow put Aquaphor in my contact case. I've considered all the rational explanations. Carbon monoxide poisoning. We have detectors that are working fine. Sleep disorders, maybe, but would we both develop the same symptoms at the same time? And what about the dog's reaction? Break-ins. The doorman would have seen someone, and nothing is ever missing. Last night, I was alone in the apartment while Ryan was working late. I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a weird squelching sound from the bathroom, like something wet being squeezed. The dogs heard it too and both looked toward the bathroom, but neither barked. I was too terrified to check. I called Ryan and stayed on the phone with him until he got home 20 minutes later. When we finally looked in the bathroom together, every single product we had, shampoo, body wash, toothpaste, my face creams, everything, had been squeezed from the middle, like someone had gripped them all with excessive force. Ryan thinks we should move. I'm not opposed to the idea, but part of me is afraid that whatever this is might follow us. Or worse, what if we're just both losing our minds? What if we move and this still happens? I don't know what to do. I don't know who to talk to about this without sounding completely insane. All I know is that something was watching me that night, and somehow it put Aquaphor in my contact case, and I have a horrible feeling this is just the beginning.